His Excellency Muhammad Mahmoud Al Khajaz, the Ambassador of the United Arab Emirates at Israel, and Dr. Milit Shamir, the Vice President of Tel Aviv University, Professor Uzi Rabi, Director of Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies, dear guests, may peace be upon you. First, I would like to express my happiness with my team at Trends for Research to be here at Tel Aviv University to reap the fruits of the Abraham Accords that drew new features for achieving peace and development through dialogue, and also I enrich our experience with Moshe Dayan with Tel Aviv, which one of the fruit of this cooperation with Moshe Dayan is to have this symposium under the title of Abraham Accords, Opportunities for Greater Cooperation, Tolerance and Development in the Region, which comes after 1 year of signing this important accord. And we witnessed some positive impact that both can reap through enhancing peace and development. And I'd like to express our happiness to have Al-Ittihad newspaper, which is headed by the editor, Mr. Hamad Al-Ka'bi, who was keen to come with us to this trip, through which we can emphasize our emphasis to have a sustainable peace based on mutual coexistence. Dear guests, this Abraham Accord represents, which started with having a peace accord in September 2020, before other like Bahrain and Sudan and Morocco joined these accords, and this has one of the main shifts that were witnessed in the Middle East for centuries, not because this is a breakthrough in the relations between Arabs and the Israelis, but also because it established for a new era of mutual cooperation that will look for the ambitions of all for development through a new vision that will have constructive dialogue as base for solving the problems and conflicts. And this accord has proved, after 1 year of signing it, that the gains through which we can have by all parties through peace much better than having conflicts that would only serve extremism and terrorism. This accord has opened new scopes and opportunities for technology and development and commerce, and the commercial exchange has increased significantly, and also the cooperation in health and education and technology have witnessed great development and has impact on all parties, especially in combating COVID-19 pandemic. And these gains will be motivation for incentives for more dialogue in the future. Dear guests, we were keen to organize this symposium with Moshe, in cooperation with Moshe Dayan Center for Middle East and African Studies, so that all other such centers will take role in enhancing peace and cooperation between all cultures and people in order to achieve prosperity, and to support the efforts that will enhance the foundations of peace, because maintaining peace is more important, and it's a responsibility to make peace. And this is not an easy mission, but it requires having other factors and elements to enhance it and to develop the peace, so that the outputs will be beneficial to all parties, whether they were part of that peace accord or not. And in this context, media, culture, education play a very important role in achieve sustainable development, achievable and sustainable peace, and to work to bring all cultures together and enhance cooperation to understand each other cultures. This will create an environment that through which we can all live together and enhance peace opportunities. And the media plays an important role in reflecting the positive idea about each other's culture and to enhance coexistence and accepting the others, as this will give the media will be targeted towards having the positive things. And media is witnessing great development now, which makes it easy now for everyone to have the media tools through which can impact the public opinion. As for the mutual economic interest, this can be enhanced by having more investments, effective investment in development fields, especially in the new economics and IT and knowledge. And this will be the main foundation through which peace, sustainable peace, will be based on. And everyone should benefit from the fruits of peace so that they can have interest in maintaining the peace. And these three fields this symposium will focus on, through which we hope that we'll have a new and innovative ideas that will enhance our cooperation and will achieve lasting peace. At the end, allow me to thank our partner Moshe Dayan Center for the hospitality and organizing this symposium, and would like to thank all the speakers in this important symposium, and also to thank the team at RENS and Moshe Dayan Center for organizing this distinguished organization of this symposium. May peace be upon you. Thank you.
His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador Mohammed Al-Khaja, my colleague, Professor Milad Shamir, Vice President of Tel Aviv University, Mr. Dr. Mohammed Al-Ali, my friend and our dear friend from Trent, ladies and gentlemen, researchers, students, dear guests. This is a great day for us. I mean, for me personally, it's a tiny history. I know that my friends do share the same feeling today. This is basically the first in-person conference we have here in Tel Aviv of a delegation coming from Abu Dhabi and Tel Aviv University and of course MDC, Moshe Dayan Center, are very pleased actually to host our dear friends here and to open up something which is going to be the beginning of a wonderful friendship, I would say. Let me, Dr. Al-Ali, just approach you in your language, actually, just to tell you how thankful and how excited all we are at this moment. And أنا أيضا يعني أعبر عن سعادتي الكاملة على هذا المجال، وعندنا يعني اتفاق كامل، وأنا طبعا مع زملائي يعني راح نعزز العلاقات في كل المجالات بيننا، وهذا يكون يعني بين مراكز البحث والخبرة، مركز ترينتس في أبو ظبي ومركز ديان في جامعة تل أبيب، وكمان يعني بين الدول. أنا حسب رأيي عندنا يعني دور مهم هون، يعني لازم
and
يعني
we
سوا يعني مع
should
بعض نبني الجسر
together build
المستقبل الأفضل
these bridges for the future, for the coming generations, for the two peoples, and we hope for that will be reflected on the whole region. فما أود أن أقوله أيضا، أنا سوف أترجم.
excited, as you know, and this is something that I think we should say at the outset. What we have here is not just a peace treaty between Israel and another Arab country. A year after the Abraham Accords, I think we can say cautiously that it goes beyond a top-down affair between people of politics. Yes, they are there, thanks God. But if to ask, I mean, if to have my impression on that, we have something which is totally different when it comes to the people-to-people link or connection. And as I said before, actually, we have a very, very instrumental role here as representatives of higher education in Israel to just promote these peace by making or put some teeth into the notion that education is highly instrumental in that thing. My friends and us, actually, we have talked a lot about what they call تغيير فكري in Arabic, which means that what we are trying to do here, via culture, via respecting the otherness of the other, to come up with something that would make a change. People in Israel are going to be well aware of UAE citizens and state and society, and I hope vice versa. And I am pretty sure that here in the Moshe Dayan Center in Tel Aviv University, we are going to have a lot of joint ventures. And especially when it comes, if I may say, to the youth in both countries, civil society, make sure that we are dealing with people-to-people thing. Yes, we know that we are in the Middle East, and this is why I said before that, you know, actually, the Jews of Iraq actually are using the term shwaya shwaya, which means actually, let's have it actually step by step, one at a time. This is exactly what we do think we should hear. I do hope that what you see here would be kind of a harbinger or kind of a starting point, a point of departure for many, many things that would make us understand that 21st century in the Middle East, for both Israel and Arab states, is going to be something totally different than we had in the 20th century. I'm coming up with sort of a glimpse of optimism. And you know, we in Israel do have peace treaties with Arab states, Egypt, Jordan. And those agreements are highly important when it comes to the geopolitical setting of the Middle East. But still, having experienced that here with our friends in Abu Dhabi and in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, I think that I stand to argue today, once again, that this is a little bit different opera than the one we used to have till now. If we're going to make the most of it by respecting the other, by coming up with, I would say, a kind of a different thinking of how actually to promote things. And you know, in the UAE, actually, there is a plan to just build up in several months from now on Al-Markaz Al-Ibrahimi, which means the Abrahamic Center, which is going to become kind of a venue where you're going to have a church, synagogue, and of course a mosque together, just to show that if you have a different attitude, if you are coming up with different practices, the sky is the limit. And I know that I am a little bit carried away. Some people tell me that, but I do believe 100% that if we are going to take it actually forward, using our expertise, do things actually in kind of a very, very well-organized manner, we're going to see kind of a different future for our next generations in the region. I would like, of course, once again to thank our friends from Trends. Actually, we have done a lot with them until now virtually, but thanks God we are here all together. Last but not least, I don't know if they are here, but there are some, the staff of the Dayan Center, without whom actually nothing would have happened today. Efrat and Moore and Zahava. They were very busy actually recently, and they came up with an extensive actually assistance. I should also thank Yazi, who's been actually with us in the recent month and was very, very instrumental in promoting and building up all this venture. So thank you all, and I do hope that we are going to have a very, very fruitful and interesting conference today. Thanks.
Shalom Aleichem. Good morning. It's always difficult to speak after such a wonderful speaker with a lot of passion. So as a diplomat, I'll have to stick to my script, at least for now. Professor Uzi Rabbi, Professor Bilal Shamir, my dear friend and ex-colleague, Hamid Al-Ali, dear students, whom I know they are joining us via Zoom link, I'm pleased to meet you all today in this symposium that celebrates our ability to exchange ideas and to communicate what we envision for the future of our communities. It is through diplomacy and open dialogue that the seeds for the Abraham Accords were first mentioned. And through action, we are able to come together and explore how we enhance our cooperation. There are hundreds of opportunities that arose from the Accords, but the tools to curate and turn dreams into reality lie in the hands of us all. It is our collective responsibility to activate the means needed to enhance the prospects for collaboration across various fields, to advance initiatives of tolerance, development, and peace. In September, we celebrated the first anniversary of signing the Abraham Accords, and within just 1 year, we have achieved exponential results in our bilateral ties. Over 60 MOUs and agreements have been signed between the UAE and Israel. We are at the forefront of exchanging art and culture, health, space, sciences, economic prosperity, food and water security, climate change, renewable energy, and education. Despite limitations due to COVID, we were delighted to welcome over 200,000 Israelis visiting the UAE. Our people were quick to exchange and engage in the spirit of openness and positive impact. And with the Green Corridor Agreement signed on just last Sunday, we are thrilled that Emiratis will be able to pick one of the 37 flights a week and only need 2.5 hours to arrive to the beautiful coastlines of Tel Aviv. With bilateral trade reaching over 2.16 billion Israeli shekels so far, we believe that if we work together intelligently, that figure can grow tenfold in the coming years. As a young country that prepares to celebrate its Golden Jubilee in less than 50 days, we recognize the crucial role of the youth. Education has always been one of the UAE's priorities, and so it is for us too. Our mission to sustain the positive momentum of the Abraham Accords is, in fact, in spirit of the region's youth that have the appetite for an optimistic future full of education, economic, and career opportunities. Each generation must rise to the challenge of its age and work bravely and resolutely to push the boundaries of ingenuity and to question and even redefine what is possible. By pushing the bounds of science and innovation to create and leave behind us a safer, cleaner, and better planet for our children and our children's children, inshallah. The generation before us walked on the surface of the moon and laid the foundation for faster and safer transportation and communication, connecting the far corners of the world and turning the world into a global village. But this global venue we today live in is still far from being a perfect world. Significant challenges from environmental challenges and finding cleaner and better ways to power, move, heat, and cool our countries, to finding ways to create and efficiently use limited resources, water and land, in a manner that utilizes the leading technical minds, universities, and R&D centers in our region, together with our economy's comparative advantages and the limited natural resources that exist in our region. To stand here in Tel Aviv University, a hub of learning and creating human capital. It is through education that we will be able to diversify our economies and compete in the global marketplace. We are able to focus on better preparations for the future. We encourage creativity and collaboration in education, and in light of the similarities between Israel and the UAE as melting pots of culture. I ask you to be dynamic students that embrace knowledge and champion ideas that will positively impact our societies. Use the Abraham Accords as a platform to fuel your drive towards solving global challenges. Allow me at this point to express my sincere thanks to Trends Research and Advisory and to Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies for their joint initiatives to organize this important symposium. These topics reflect a praiseworthy understanding of what think tanks should do to promote the values of tolerance, development, and cooperation between countries and their people. The building of peace and achievement of prosperity and common good requires promoting a culture that supports such values. This culture, in turn, requires a responsible media that focuses on the positive and constructive aspects to enhance human relations between people and avoid delving into issues that may promote intolerance, hatred, and extremism. To further advance the goal that we seek to achieve, we must be focused on using the common opportunities and how to deploy modern technology and the huge development capabilities possessed by the two countries to build our desired future. Finally, I wish you all success, and I hope that the symposium will come up with tangible recommendations that support our shared objective of enhancing the opportunities of peace, development, and prosperity for our two countries and all people of the region. Toda rabba, and good luck.
His Excellency, Ambassador Mohammed Mahmoud Al-Khaja, Dr. Mohammed Abdullah Al-Ali, my friend and colleague, Professor Uzi Rabi, distinguished guests. It is really truly a delight for me to greet you this morning on behalf of Tel Aviv University. It's an honor to be the host of this important symposium on the opportunities presented by the Abraham Accords. It is a particular privilege to address a delegation from the leading and influential research institute, Trends. So welcome everyone to our campus. When it comes to its mission and its strategy, I think that Tel Aviv University has much in common with Trends. Both institutions are committed to the goal of promoting rigorous academic research on key challenges faced by our societies and faced by our world today. And both institutions seek to build on robust international partnerships as a means of enhancing this research and strengthening its impact, both regionally and in the entire world. Since its foundation, Tel Aviv University has cultivated a great number of strategic partnerships around the world with growing momentum over the last decades, especially in Western Europe, in the United States, in China, in India. But what the signing of the Abraham Accords has signaled for us here at Tel Aviv University is the possibility of opening up new opportunities for partnership in our own region. And this potential for collaboration with academics and researchers in the Gulf, and particularly in the UAE, was greeted here, I can tell you, with tremendous enthusiasm. Since my own role at the university is to promote international collaborations, I was able to witness firsthand the excitement that the signing of the Abraham Accords generated across our campus. Within a few days, maybe a few weeks, after the announcement of the Accords, literally dozens of calls and emails arrived at my office from faculty members asking whether we could help them establish connections with partners in the UAE. Such requests came from all over campus, from our law school and our business school, from the Center for Cybersecurity and the Center for Environmental Studies, from experts in culture, education, biomed, AI, food security, to list only a few. Clearly, the Abraham Accords have sparked the curiosity and the imagination of our faculty and created a strong aspiration for meaningful new academic ties. In the a little over a year that have passed since the signing of the Accords, some of these aspirations developed into initial contacts. Others are still on hold. But a few initiatives, and I say this as Professor Rabi said before with caution, a few initiatives have already begun to flourish into active collaborations of what I think is significant promise. And let me just give you two very brief examples. The first example is the establishment of research ties in the field of applied water research, ties that involve Tel Aviv University, a partner university in Abu Dhabi, as well as two companies, Watergen in Israel and Bainuna in the UAE. The common bond that propels this project is obvious. Both in Israel and in the UAE, there is strong interest in the development of advanced technologies for finding renewable sources for pure water. So it's not surprising that a collaboration around water technologies has quickly given rise to joint workshops and to joint publications. And in the near future, we're all hoping this collaboration will lead to the establishment of a full-scale TAU UAE Center for Water Research, one that will promote joint grant proposals, the exchange of faculty and graduate students, and much more. A second example that I'd like to mention here is the plan for the creation of a joint academy for aging research in the UAE. Just as concern for pure water cuts across national boundaries, so does the need to help people live longer, healthier, better lives, and the need to help societies successfully manage the demographic challenges of an aging population. As we know, this is a goal in the entire world, and the United Nations has declared the next decade as the decade of healthy aging. The plan for a world-leading aging academy in the UAE is being put together by Tel Aviv University along with Columbia University, with MIT, with the Weizmann Institute, and an influential organization based in Dubai. It is planned to generate cutting-edge research on aging in fields ranging from medicine to psychology to economics to law. It will also support the development of technologies that address the challenges of aging, and it will serve as an educational hub for training students and professionals in interdisciplinary aging studies. And Ambassador, I very much share your emphasis on the importance of education in our collaborations. Now, both of these collaborative ventures, the Water Research Center and the Academy on Aging, have the right ingredients for success. They focus on areas of common regional and international concern. They built on existing global partnerships in both the UAE and at Tel Aviv University, and they draw significant support from industry. However, what I think will truly boost these ventures' chances to thrive, what would boost the chances of any research collaborations between the UAE and Israel, is a wider framework, a framework of mutual understanding based on dialogue and on meaningful exchange of ideas. This is why I think this proceedings today are so important. The importance of the ties established between Trends and the Dayan Center, the importance of today's symposium, for providing a rigorous ongoing dialogue between experts on the political, economic, cultural, social, and media-related aspects of the relations between Israel and the UAE, a dialogue that seeks to deepen understanding and to foster mutual respect. It is a crucial ingredient for the creation of a successful collaborative ecosystem between our two countries. No joint venture, I believe, could truly thrive without this kind of collaboration. So it's really with great, great excitement that I await today's presentations and today's dialogue and conversations. I would like to once again thank our guests for coming to Tel Aviv University and for sharing with us their knowledge and their expertise. And I wish you all a very productive day. Thank you very much.
The first session will be shedding light on the role of culture in promoting the values of tolerance and dialogue. The panel chair for today's panel will be Professor Uzi Rabi, the director of the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies. The speakers will be Mohammed Khalfan al-Sawafi, political researcher, and Dr. Leora Haldelman Bavor, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, director of the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies in Tel Aviv University. I hand over it to our moderator today, Professor Uzi Rabi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yazi, and good morning to everybody. I am pleased to open the symposia and just chair the first panel. And this panel, in my opinion, is highly important when it comes to our symposia. Why? Because we are now a year after the Abraham Accords. There are many thoughts about what is left behind, where do we stand now, how should we refer to the Abraham Accords. Many would argue, even Israelis, that this is a mere geopolitical tactic, maneuver of my enemy's friend can be, my enemy's enemy can be my friend. I don't want to elaborate on that. Partially, it's true. Israel and the UAE do see eye to eye when it comes to both challenges and opportunities in the region. At least from my experience, I can say that. So geopolitics are there. Second, we know that there is a huge interaction when it comes to the gadgets of startup nation, high technology. And even here in Tel Aviv University, as was elaborated on by my colleague, Professor Milet Shamir, you have seen how vast is the cooperation when it comes to high technology, scientific ventures, etc. But I always say, and this recent year actually made me understand and realize that there is an extra dimension in the Abraham Accords, especially when it comes to the UAE and Israel. Haven't been there, talked to so many people. From the early moment, you got the feeling that the simple fact that you are an Israeli is not something that is going to prevent you from whatsoever experience you're going to have while touring and visiting the United Arab Emirates. But as a tourist, it would be very artificial, actually, to come up with clear-cut conclusions. Since I am writing, actually, a book on the United Arab Emirates, and one of the chapters is dealing with culture, media, I thought that it would be very essential to go through the curricula at all levels and see what are the messages being sent to students, pupils at all levels in the United Arab Emirates. And I have been asked about that too many a time. And here is the main thing here. Tolerance, respecting the otherness of the other, stay away of extremism of any sort, especially those professional troublemakers who are using religion for promoting political objectives or group interest or whatever. This made me understand that there's a lot here that comes from above. Yes, it is orchestrated by the state. But what I have found is many, many ramifications of that trend when it comes to the people at large. Emiratis do think and come up with different impressions as to what the Middle East is, what it should be. And simply put, I think that there are here a case of two states who, at a certain stage, asked something that is unheard of when it comes to the modern story of the Middle East. Why not? Why not? If you are not my enemy. If we have a mutual interest, why shouldn't we put it to the test? And this is exactly what we have here. This is a multi-layer building. To stick to one floor, geopolitics or high-tech, would be just part of the wisdom. We have to take it all and give it a chance, because here we are going to provide together a new vocabulary, new terminology of how to come up with this peaceful coexistence. So all these things in Arabic, تعايش سلمي, or تغيير فكري, you give a change your thought about things, your attitude about the others. This is why I do think that we have here something that bears a huge potential for changing things in the Middle East. And thanks God, here in Tel Aviv University, we are blessed to have the opportunity to lead that when it comes to higher education. And once again, since education is so important and so instrumental in that process, we are responsible. We should take upon ourselves the commitment and move forward with it. For that purpose, we compiled this first session. What is the role of culture in promoting the values of tolerance and dialogue? And we have two distinguished researchers, for that matter, The first speaker would be Muhammad Khalfan al-Sawafi. And Muhammad wrote a lot about that stuff in periodicals, papers. I'm pretty sure that his contribution to our discussion is going to be highly essential. The second speaker actually would be Dr. Leora Hendelman Bavour. Dr. Hendelman Bavour is the head of the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies in Tel Aviv University. She's coming from the other side of the Gulf, so to speak. But she has a lot to say about what we have here, because culture, media, and stuff which is related to understanding the other and tolerance is something that she also has written a lot about. So without further ado, Muhammad, please.
مساء الخير.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ozi, for the introduction. It seems our topic is interesting and complicated at the same time, and Dr. Ozi presented a lot of points in regard to this issue, despite the fact I will choose one point about the United Arab Emirates to get into this important topic. Really, as Dr. Uzi mentioned, the United Arab Emirates has a different understanding of the Middle East, and this understanding can be expanded to go beyond the Middle East and to go to the whole world. And how can we have this vision for the Middle East in the United Arab Emirates? We in the United Arab Emirates, we have a lot of foreigners in our country that exceed our nationals. We have more than 200 nationalities around the world, and this is very important in understanding the others. And this hosting of other nationalities is based on heritage, historical heritage since the establishment of the Emirates in the 70s, in 71, based on accepting the others and focusing on dialogue for understanding. My presentation will be for three categories, so I have only 7 minutes, and then we can have more discussions. The first point in regard to culture, I believe there is a big importance for dialogue. Most of the problems that exist in the Middle East and in the world is related to the understanding the culture and the stereotyped ideas about the others. So each one has a stereotyped idea about the other people, and this stereotype image will not change if we don't have communication and dialogue. And our presence today at RENS today is one of the means of dialogue and to open channels with you as a first step. And if I'm not wrong, this is the first Arab delegation that comes here to show the sincerity of our will to support the Abrahamic Accord. So this is a first step for dialogue and for looking for common aspects among us, and to try to avoid any disagreements that might hinder the Abrahamic Accords. This is the first point. The second point, we combined two tools, two important tools in regard to promoting the culture of mutual dialogue, which is through media and research center, and both have big responsibility in changing the wrong stereotyped image about the other. So I believe many of the friends here in Israel and back home, here in Israel, they have untrue image about our people in the Emirates, and this based on the research that or the ideology that each one of us has about the Emirati people, and also the traditional media and the social media. These are two important tools that are present today with us, and they have the responsibility to redraw the true features and characteristics of the United Arab Emirates, and how they look at Israel as state and people, and how to accept each other. This is the second point. The third point, which will I include my intervention with, I join my opinion to, or my voice to the other voices that say that the Abraham Accords will have a big role in leading the change about the image of the Middle East to Israel, and also in the Middle East and Africa. And in return, those who carry the untrue image or mindset about the United Arab Emirates, we will be able as people to change this stereotyped idea, and to change this conviction. And I will talk again about the political and social heritage of in the United Arab Emirates, and Dr. Muhammad, His Excellency, talked about also about the openness of having religious freedom, and by having a church, synagogue, and the mosque all in the same place. And these are the principles on which the United Arab Emirates is based on. And if we look at the details of the Abraham Accords, it carries a lot of things, and the focus maybe was on the technical and the economic and the agriculture aspects, but we also need to change the mindset, and because that would lead to changing all the other misconceptions. So if we want really these agreements to succeed, we need to change the mindsets. Thank you.
I would like to thank Trends and the Moshe Dayan Center for the meticulous organization of this inspiring joint event. I'm grateful for the invitation to participate, despite being a sort of an outsider as a scholar of a non-Arab state, namely Iran. What I wish to discuss today is Iran-Israel relations by diving into the history and connection between the people of these lands. In this respect, there are good news and bad news. The good news is that Iran and Israel do not share a common border. They have never fought each other in a war and have no territorial claims on each other's land. However, over the last 4 decades, Israel and Iran have been engaged in a low-intensity conflict. Iran has been accused of sponsoring terrorist attacks against Jewish and Israeli targets around the world. Israel is alleged to have assassinated several Iranian nuclear scientists and to have been the main force, along with the United States, in technological or technical incidents directed at Iran's nuclear facilities. The list of accusations of each of these two countries is much longer, and neither side has ever acknowledged carrying out much of these alleged attacks. Furthermore, 3 days ago, the spiritual leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, speaking at the 35th International Islamic Unity Conference in Tehran, called the Abraham Accords a mistake and urged the regional states involved to reverse their normalization of ties with Israel. Against this background, the aim of my presentation is twofold. I wish to show that contrary to the contemporary mutual hostility and conflict projected from the headlines that govern the international media and also the Israeli media, Iran-Israel relations are much more nuanced and should not be viewed from this limited perspective alone. Secondly, Iran-Israel relations are connected with major episodes in Iranian Jewish history, which have relevant implications to the present and to the Jewish community that resides in Israel to this very day. These historic and cultural ties can serve important building blocks in overcoming contemporary divisions between the people of these two ancient nations. Hopefully, it will happen sooner than later with the help of our friends in the United Arab Emirates. The origins of Iranian-Jewish relations date back to biblical times. In the 6th century BC, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and initiated a wave of deportation that was the start of exile and of the Jewish diaspora. Expelled from their land, groups of Jews had to make their long voyage to Babylonia, many of whom did not survive the journey. The Babylonian exile ended when the empire was conquered by Cyrus, the founder of the Achaemenid kingdom, the first Persian empire. Under his rule, the empire expanded vastly and embraced all the previous civilized states of the ancient Near East. During the 30 years of his reign, King Cyrus made a public declaration, the content of which was preserved in the biblical book of Ezra. According to this declaration, the Jews were granted the right to return to their land and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. Archaeological excavations conducted in the late 19th century discovered a clay cylinder bearing a long inscription in Akkadian that supported the biblical declaration as an accurate reflection of history. Following the declaration, some of the Babylonian exiles returned to Jerusalem and rebuilt the temple. In celebration of this episode, in 2015, an official stamp was issued in Israel where the cylinder of Cyrus appears in the foreground of decoration inspired by Persian art in the background. Two other monuments which are located in Iran hold a special place in the historical biblical memory of the Jewish people till this very day. One is the Mausoleum of the prophet Daniel in Susa, and second is the tomb of Esther and Mordecai in Hamadan. Further along the centuries, following the Arab conquest and spread of Islam in the 7th century, Jews who remained in Iran were considered people of the book, Ahl al-Kitab, and thus are protected by religious law. But their circumstances were far from free of prejudice, discrimination, and persecution. A major transformation in the life of the Jewish communities in Iran, referred in relevant literature as the Golden Age, reached its peak in the 1960s. This was a result of the close ties between Iran and the West, and especially the cordial relations between the State of Israel and the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. In that period, Iran's Jewish community prospered economically and enjoyed cultural autonomy, and some of them rose to high position in the civil service. The Shah also recognized the existence of the State of Israel, not de jure, but de facto, and pushed for cooperation between the two nations in both private and the public sector. During the era of the Pahlavi monarchy, mainly since the 1960s, the two countries not only had close ties, but also maintained a strategic alliance. Although the relations were never formal, they gradually developed into one Iranian official at the time termed love relations without a marriage contract. This period of close ties came to an abrupt end with the formation of the Islamic Revolution following the Iranian Revolution of 1979. Among all the countries found blameworthy of the Iranian revolutionary movement, Israel, in addition to the United States, was indicted to more accounts than any other state. The formation of the Islamic Republic of Iran following the revolution also marked a dramatic turning point in the modern history of Iranian Jewry. By December 1979, massive waves of Jews had fled the country. The commercial and financial golden interlude of the Jewish socioeconomic elites came to an end with their departure, and holdings owned by some of them were confiscated. The nature of the community's relations with the Jewish world, most notably with Israel, also transformed dramatically as the Islamic Republic consolidated its anti-American and anti-Israeli official position. However, similar to domestic policy of tolerance towards other religious minorities, the Islamic Republic Constitution guarantees Jewish Iranians certain autonomous rights, similar to those previously they had under the monarchy, such as freedom to practice their own faith and preserve their customs. Their statutory status, nevertheless, does not preclude the government from subjugating its Jewish citizens to occasional discrimination, not only of religious dictate, but of political expediency as well. Most significantly, the formation of the Islamic Republic had a major demographic impact on Iranian Jewry. Within 1 decade, the Jewish population in Iran dwindled by an estimated 75%. During the war with Iraq in 1981 to 1988, excuse me, the Jewish population further decreased significantly. The majority of the Jewish population immigrated to the United States, Israel, and other countries, while the remaining bulk is concentrated in the capital, Tehran. Nowadays, available figures estimate that between 200 to 250,000 Jews of Iranian origin reside in Israel, and 60 to 80,000 in the United States. As already pointed out, in terms of their legal status, the Islamic Republic Constitution explicitly addressed Iranian Jewry in conjunction with other religious minorities. At the same time, it also refers to them implicitly in legal provisions provided for non-Muslims in general. The Constitution stipulates that Zoroastrian, Jewish, and Christian Iranians are the only recognized religious minorities. As tolerated minorities, they are free to perform, within the limits of the law, their religious rites and ceremonies, and to act according to their own customs in matters of personal status and religious education. In practice, the ruling authorities are given a wide leeway in determining what constitutes an act against Islam and against the state, especially under cloaked accusations of connections with Israel. The most notable feature of the Islamic Republic's commitment to integrate religious minorities into the revolutionary system is Article 64 of the Constitution, which guarantees the Jewish community one reserved seat in parliament. Of the 290 deputies of the Majlis, 5 legislators are members of the recognized minorities. In terms of community life, under the Islamic Republic, all the affairs of the Jewish population are regulated by 3 principal authorities: the Jewish Religious Authority of the Chief Rabbi, a position currently occupied by Rabbi Yehuda Gerami, the Board of Directors of the Tehran Jewish Committee, and the Office of the Jewish Legislator in Parliament. The Tehran Jewish Committee is partly funded by the state, and its activities are closely monitored. The Tehran Committee is also coordinating the communal activities of Jewish associations in other cities, and it is in charge with publishing a monthly journal. In terms of community life, there are several active synagogues in Tehran and Shiraz. There are also Jewish schools, but they only operate in Tehran. Because of the political tensions, any connection between the Jewish community nowadays living in Iran and the State of Israel is a very, very sensitive issue. No less complicated are the socio-cultural connections between Israeli and Iranians, which are informal, unofficial, and many times spontaneous specks of gestures. Although the examples I will show are anecdotal, I do believe they have an immaculative effect which reflect on the future possibilities of normalization between the peoples of these 2 nations. In 2008, Iranian street artist A1 teamed up with an Israeli artist named Inspire and Poe to create a series of works called The Evolution of Violence. It was to be showcased on the street walls of Tel Aviv and Tehran simultaneously. But the series was never developed beyond these initial drawings. The year 2012 witnessed additional interesting projects. On March 14th, an Israeli couple named Roni Edri and Michal Tamir, together with a small preparatory school for graphic design students, uploaded to Facebook posters depicting images of themselves with their children, alongside words, "Iranians, we will never bomb your country, we love you." In the course of several days, the page received over 120,000 likes. A video posted on YouTube in March 2012 with similar messages of "Iranians, we love you," showing Israelis belonging to different ages and classes, was viewed in one day more than 40,000 times. Around the same time, another initiative at the University of Haifa launched a project of TETEL, an acronym for Tehran, Haifa, Tel Aviv. with the hope of opening direct and apolitical bridge between Israelis and Iranians. Also in 2012, the Israeli-Iranian pop star diva Rita released her album All My Joys in Persian. Shortly after, the songs were uploaded online and her album won an underground fan base in Iran. Around the same time, the Iranian-Israeli singer Hezi Faniyan released a single in Persian titled Solam, sending peace to the Iranian people. Also in the music scene, in December the same year, a group of Iranians recorded themselves driving on a highway in Tehran as they listened and danced to the music of the Israeli psytrance electronic duo Infected Mushrooms. Going forward with the years, in 2019, international media outlets reported that the Islamic Republic forced one of its judo champions, Saeed Mulai, to forfeit the competition in order to avoid the Israeli competitor, Sagi Muki. It was later reported that Mulai defected to Germany. In February 2020, the two champions met in Europe and became friends. And in February this year, Mulai visited Israel. The final example is the Israeli thriller television series Tehran, premiered in Israel on June 2020. The series raised a lot of interest among viewers in Iran who were able to watch it unofficially via the internet. In conclusion, Iran is very much present in the daily life of Israeli culture in many other ways than the nuclear issue and conflict. And these examples that I've mentioned, along with what you can see in front of you, are clear indication of the multifaceted, unofficial, people-to-people connections that can bring further change in the region. I would like to end with a quote from the 10th century Persian epic, the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings of Ferdowsi. Be relentless in striving for the cause of good. Bring the spring you must. Banish the winter you should. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Leora. We are left with 20 minutes to have a lively discussion about this issue. So before actually collecting some questions and insights from the audience, just to follow up on what Leora just said, I mean, the Jewish history, Jews of Arab lands, what we have experienced in the recent year, and I do think that it has to do with the Abraham Accords, is kind of an effort, sincere effort, in some places in the Middle East, to reconstruct the Jewish history when it comes to Arab states on land. And of course, we have a lot to do on that too. It is being seen, of course, in United Arab Emirates. In Bahrain, there is the inauguration of the synagogue. In Morocco, there's a lot of stuff that is going on. And I think that what was there as a black hole, Jewish history in Arab lands, this is something that is being reconstructed. Of course, there are different levels, but we are there also actually to just catch the moment and make the most of it. So let's just, Ofra, please. Professor Ofra Benjo, please.
I can't hear her. She needs to use the mic.
Yeah, I mean, what Professor Benjo has just asked, and this was a question directed to Muhammad al-Sawafi, is she asked about this is how she actually termed it, the elephant in the room. So this is how actually she refers to the Palestinian issue, which is definitely still there. It's a very big problem. But to what extent this is something that is being taken into account when it comes to the Abraham Accords? What necessarily actually could be the, let us say, policy or attitude of Emirates in that regard? So in what sense there is a correlation between things, or maybe it's just kind of a contrast or contrasting each other?
يكون نقيض لما يحدث. I will divide my answer to two parts.
مع اليهود أعتقد أن
This is not only a disagreement between the Emirates and the Jews. This is a global issue, not only the Arab-Jewish relations or the Emirate Jewish relations. In regard to the Emirates today, we support the peace process, and we reiterated that more than once. We want to achieve peace in the region. Our impact is to support the communication and to solve the Palestinian cause permanently. It will not affect our state, because we can distinguish our relationships and with the others, but we need to support stability and social peace. All these terminology were mentioned in the Abraham Accords, and we are trying to practice that not only in the Emirates but around the world. And we do activities to support that, and we work on the communication between the Palestinians and the Israelis to reach a permanent solution and to achieve stability in the region and thus in the world.
Yes, I think that this was a straight answer. Yes, please. Muhammad al-Sawafi.
excuse me, if you are from Palestine, can you speak Arabic, please? Can you speak Arabic, please? Because
I'll repeat the question. Yeah. Yes, okay. What Hassan al-Badur actually is asking is, and this is again a question directed to Muhammad al-Sawafi, is that I think that what Muhammad said is that, with all respect to the Palestinian issue, and there is, United Arab Emirates is doing kind of a particular calculus, and while conducting its relations with Israel, this would be kind of a bilateral issue. Of course, if the United Arab Emirates could form kind of a pillar or bring in sort of an assistance to solving out the Palestinian problem, this is, as Muhammad said, this is something that is more than welcome. But the question says, when you say that we are talking here about two states that are not to be known belligerents, they are not belligerents, this is what Muhammad said. What do you mean actually for the Palestinians? So what is the final impact of this whole thing when it comes to the Palestinians? Correct me if I'm wrong. benefit of the Palestinians, of course. How Palestinians are going to be benefited from the Abraham Accords. Good.
Can you translate, please?
I'll translate.
Yeah.
Yep.
فتبعتهم راح تكون. Is this your question, Mr. Hassan? What would be the benefit for Palestinians from the Abraham Accords? About the Emirates. Yeah. I'm talking here from the perspectives of the United Arab Emirates, and the peace is beneficial to all and to Palestinians as well. And I think the Palestinians have suffered a lot from conflicts and wars that were without results, and only those who have their own agendas benefited from these wars, and other countries benefited from that conflict. So I believe the Abraham Accords will be very beneficial to Palestinians, and we can see how this will solve many of the conflicts with the Palestinians and in the area. That's my belief. لا يوجد هنالك شروط
Good willing
هنالك
to give a
حسن
hand to the Palestinian issue when the time comes. And definitely, if I may say so, and this is actually just to repeat what Muhammad said, this should be taken as a bilateral peace treaty between Israel and United Arab Emirates. There were no shuruts, but I think that the intention is one way or the other to bring some benefits to the Palestinians too. Of course, it has to do with the Israeli and Palestinian consent on kind of a solution to their problem. Muhammad, would you like actually to add something? Yeah. Leora? Yeah, please.
Okay. What I want to ask is, one of the things that I've mentioned is the pressure coming from Iran on the United Arab Emirates to reverse.
Yep.
From Accords, from the ties with Israel. There is a lot of pressure from Iran from different levels, official and unofficially. And Israeli, not only as a scholar of Iran, I wonder how you stand the pressure. I mean, do you pay attention to it? Is it something that it's not new? Because as the supreme leader of Iran said, he considered the Abraham Accords a fault and a mistake that jeopardized Islamic unity. So I'm actually asking, what is the response
Of
your side?
the Emirati side.
هذه الضغوطات التي تمارسها إيران عليكم.
أعتقد أن أنا جانب
I will only focus on the Emirate, but I can't intervene about other relations. هل سألتم
There is a lot to say about Iran. I mean, the Iranian people, actually, as Leora presented, I mean, some of them are messed up with this regime, and some of them even say some good words about Israel, and more so. And we know it. But I'll take the liberty to say something which is very, very simple here. This is the difference between Iran and the United Arab Emirates. Iran is ruled by an anachronistic regime that is using the 20th century trick by which Israel is the main problem in the Middle East and the only problem. And this is why actually they are coming up with that. They are still of the opinion that this is something by which they can bolster and promote their own interests. Here comes a state, and there are some others who realized that this was false and that this premise was something that worked against their own interests. Now, how many people in Israel, just tell me, even those who are sitting here, have mentioned time and again that no normalization between Arab states and Israel can happen unless there is a comprehensive peace process between Israeli and Palestinians. I know that because my teacher taught me that here in this university. Sorry for that. And I respect them because they are very knowledgeable. They were wrong. The simple fact that we are here now says that it is wrong. So, of course, the Palestinian problem is there. We have to do whatever we can in order actually to create something or a new reality here. And everybody knows that the Palestinians are suffering, and I'm not going actually to compare suffering. But make sure that you are having sort of an idea about the shifting sense of geopolitics in the region. We cannot come up with those slogans of the Middle East in the 20th century. They are null and void. Now, if you would like actually to come up together, if we would like to do things together, ahlan wa sahlan. You are more than welcome. And I think, knowing my Emirati friends and what they have in mind, they are not neglecting the Palestinian issue, as many would argue. They do hope that the Abraham Accords, the new attitude, the new understandings are going to become something with which to change other issues or problems in the Middle East. I'm sorry, yes. Any other comment and question, please? I mean, we have 5 minutes. Please.
Iranians, and all those anecdotes could help promote a change, and if all it can happen, not even Islamic art, but how much do you think people can motivate as far as cultural? These things catch a bigger audience than 40,000 likes. How much of this connection has now established? Lucky is to like a page, and I know that there are Lebanese that are in connection. I wonder how much of this research can really ignite a better, comprehensive connection.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the question. Yes. Okay. How the anecdotal incidents and connections that I showed between the people of Israel and Iranians can actually initiate an actual change in the future, someday in the future. And one of the things that I said was that hopefully it will happen sooner than later. What we saw is that there are so many bridges that can tie Iranians and Israelis together. And I believe, again, that our friends here from the United Arab Emirates can have a lot of, a very significant role in advancing it, because I think that there are more things in our history and in our culture that can put us together than separate us. And it just strikes me right now when I'm thinking about how to answer your question, a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. And she once said, it is better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. So if we put the positive things and the things that unite us from the past and the culture, instead of looking at what separates us, I believe that we can have a better future, again, for our children, for our grandchildren. There is a whole new generation in Iran that was born after the revolution. The sole knowledge of the region is what the Islamic Republic is putting or instructing through their curriculum. I believe that what happened with the Abraham Accords showed of how fast what we thought is impossible becomes possible. And I heard yesterday Uzi said that I think he was quoting Emil Habibi, right? Saying that he said he's very pessimistic, but he's becoming optimistic, and he's optimistic. So I want to I want to believe that the change can happen very, very fast. And I believe that if there will be a will, there will be a way, because there are a lot of things that connect these two cultures together. Again, from ancient times, from before the current hostilities.
One last question. That must be something which is really, really... Joel. Dr. Joel Parker, Moshe Dayan Center.
أنا أعرف. أعتقد أن نحن هني جاي نركز على الجانب الثقافي.
Here we are focusing on the cultural aspect of the Abraham Accords, and we're not going into other political files between Syria and Emirates and other relations. This is not the venue for that. We are talking about the role of culture in benefiting from the Abraham Accords.
Okay, so are we done? Done? Okay, so first of all, let me thank the presenters for their wonderful presentations and participation in this panel. Thank you all.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch break. For the second panel, we'll be highlighting the role of media in enhancing peace and human fraternity. The panel chair is Dr. Leora Hendelman. I'm so sorry. I'm always wrong when I pronounce your name. The director of the Alliance Center of Iranian Studies in Tel Aviv University. For the speakers, we'll have Hamad Al-Ka'bi. Unfortunately, he had an emergency and had to leave. However, his discussion is pre-recorded. Hamad Al-Ka'bi is the editor-in-chief of Al-Ittihad newspaper in the UAE. Netta Levene, I'm so sorry, editor-in-chief of Yediot Ahronot newspaper in Israel. And Dr. Nir Booms, researcher fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies. Thank you.
Okay, so مساء الخير. It is a pleasure to open the second session of this joint conference. Again, I'm grateful both to the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University and to Trends. It's really inspiring, especially considering my generation, again, that we thought what was made possible was impossible for many years. So I'm personally very hopeful towards the future. I will start by saying, quoting Eleanor Roosevelt, who once said, "It is not enough to talk about peace. One must believe in it. And it isn't enough to believe in it. One must work at it." And I believe that we are making the first steps of working at it. And again, I'm very hopeful and grateful for that. We all know that information is power, and it has impact on public discourse, attitude, and policy. As central outlet of information and insights, the media has a central and highly important role in times of war and conflict, and all the more in advancing and maintaining peace. As an historian of Iranian press and journalism, I'm especially excited to chair this second panel of the program titled The Role of the Media in Enhancing Peace and Human Fraternity. To discuss the topic, we have an all-star cast, and they were introduced briefly by Yazi, but I will try to be a little more elaborative about each and every one of them. So as you could hear, our first speaker unfortunately had to leave, and we will hear his pre-recorded speech, but I will at least mention that Hamad Al-Ka'bi, the editor-in-chief of Al-Ittihad newspaper, he holds a bachelor degree in journalism and master's in business administration from the United Arab Emirates University. After joining the Al-Ittihad editorial team in 2002, he worked as a field reporter in the local news department for 10 years before being appointed as deputy chief editor for the local news desk. Al-Ka'bi later worked as the head of the local news department and then as head of the media investigations department before being elevated to the position of deputy editor-in-chief of the newspaper. He has also served as acting executive director of the editorial and publishing division. Besides managing the newsroom of Al-Ittihad, Al-Ka'bi writes a weekly column on local and political affairs. And now I will, with much pleasure, allow you to hear his presentation.
قبل ما يزيد على عام واكبنا في
About a
تغطيتنا
year, more than a
الصحفية
year ago,
الاتفاقات الإبراهيمية
the Abrahamic
وكيف كانت
Accords
نقلة نوعية
were
في طبيعة
signed, and
العلاقات
it was a
بين
qualitative
دول منطقة
leap
الشرق
in the
الأوسط
relationships between
ورصدنا
countries in
أبعادها
the Middle East.
كخطوة
We followed the implications of this historical step taken by the United Arab Emirates with a clear vision towards a future of coexistence and brotherhood and cooperation. We followed in the local newspapers the ramifications of these accords and the politics of the UAE and how it could implement the principles of the accords within its own legislation and politics and daily practices. And this is a unique vision of the UAE since its establishment, which was carried on generation after generation. The media is a reflection of the society, and it harbors what is positive for its own people and contributes to the education of future generations that foresee abandoning conflicts and stressing on brotherhood. Peace is a major value in all three Abrahamic religions. It is the key for the prosperity of every nation and of our converse. We are going forward to educating generations that work for peace and disseminate hope within their own people that transcends differences in religions. We are aware of the importance of promoting education for peace within media and through media to resist the hate speech and to see the other through equality and through fraternity. and abandoning all conflicts. This is a unique role that UAA took on itself in the year 2019, which was declared the year of fraternity. Through the Abrahamic Accords, High Council for Islamic Communities was established, and the Islamic Council, Higher Council, was also established in order to promote justice and promoting peace. Our newspaper, Al-Ittihad, followed the Pope's pilgrimage and his call from Vatican towards humanity through the Abrahamic Accords, which were signed in Washington in the USA. And on the 15th of September 2020, the editorial of our newspaper talked and focused on the Abrahamic Accords. Following this historical event, as well, in parallel, also Yedeot Achronot published a similar editorial on the same topic, and in cooperation with Yedeot Achronot, we continued to publish similar articles, as well as Yisrael Hayom, another daily newspaper in Israel. We all promoted the accords and talked about the cooperation between the UAE and Israel. On the 3rd of August 2021, and on the anniversary of the 1 year to the Abraham Accords, we followed the events carried out in UAE and stressed the positive new atmosphere and the new challenges in cooperation in agriculture, science, climate change, and media. The newspapers in both countries should continue to talk and write about the cooperation between the two countries in very vital topics like high-tech, artificial intelligence, logistics, healthcare, environment, agriculture, and water issues. The accords started a new era of coexistence in our area, followed by similar steps of Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and other countries which adopted this new vision towards a future of peace and coexistence and fraternity. Media should harbor teams who are able to write and promote for such values and to combat the speech of the hate speech and which is deviant, and should harbor a speech towards a common future that will enhance human values. From our experience in Al-Ittihad newspaper, we were present always in this file and topic of coexistence, tolerance, and peace. There are steps, proven steps, and not only words or theories, to the role of media that could establish a path for all newspapers to follow. Media is able to establish the basic steps for followers of the three religions in order to come together and resist natural disasters and work together towards for example, in the battle against the coronavirus, the media in the United Arab Emirates played a very positive role of raising awareness and disseminating vital information to help others. Thank you for giving me the time to convey my message to you, and I wish for this very valuable conference that where researchers from the United Arab Emirates and Israel come together, and I wish you a very fruitful and positive outcome for the benefit of your people and the region as a whole. Thank you.
I couldn't help but being reminded
لم يسعني إلا أن أتذكر
Martin Luther King, and I feel I'm quoting too many people today, but he once said, we either all work together as brothers or perish together as fools. So this is something to think about. Our second speaker is Neta Livne. He began his journalistic career in Galei Tzahal. You can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want problems with the press. In 2002, he began working for the Ma'ariv newspaper. 5 years later, in 2007, he was appointed head of the Ma'ariv news department, and in 2011, he was appointed deputy editor of the newspaper and editor of the weekend supplement Sof Shavua. In November 2012, he was appointed head of Yediot, Achronot news department, and in 2018, Livne was appointed as editor-in-chief of the newspaper. We are very happy you could join us today, Neta. The floor is all yours.
שלום לכולם, צהריים טובים. מכובדיי באי הכנס ומארגניו, פרופסור רבי. זהו כבוד גדול עבורי כעורך העיתון הישראלי ידיעות אחרונות, לשוחח איתכם כאן בוועידה ראשונה מסוגה, שנה לאחר הטקס בו חתמו המדינות שלנו על הסכם שלום היסטורי. נושא המושב שלנו הוא תפקידה של התקשורת בתהליך השלום. ואני מאמין שבהסכם השלום הנוכחי, זה שאנחנו דנים בו הבוקר היום, את ניצניו אנחנו רואים בשנה האחרונה, לתקשורת היה תפקיד מכריע. העיתונות היא שמחברת בין שני עמים שכרתו שלום. עיתונות היא שאפשרה לי כעורך עיתון ישראלי לכתוב לפני שנה מאמר ראשון מסוגו בערבית אל הקוראים באיחוד האמירויות, חמד הזכיר אותו, ולפרסם אותו במקביל בעברית בעיתון שלנו. היא שאפשרה לעורך הראשי של עית אחד, מר אלקאבי, לפרסם מאמר באותו בוקר אצלנו לקוראים בישראל. אתמול מר קאבי ביקר אצלנו במערכת והביקור מאוד מרגש. עיתונות היא הטיוטה הראשונה של ההיסטוריה, אמר המו"ל המיתולוגי של הוושינגטון פוסט פיליפ גרם כבר ב-1963. והנה דוגמה לסיפור עיתונאי שהניע תהליך היסטורי. בחודש יוני 2020, שגריר איחוד האמירויות בארצות הברית פרסם מאמר נדיר וראשון מסוגו בידיעות אחרונות. אני מבקש לקחת אתכם לרגע אל מאחורי הקלעים של המאמר המדובר הזה. המיליארדר הישראלי אמריקאי חיים סבן סיפר לא מזמן בריאיון כי השגריר יוסף אלוטייבה פנה אליו קודם לכן והתייעץ איתו היכן כדאי לפרסם מאמר כדי לפנות ישירות אל הקהל בישראל. הוא שאל אותו אם כדאי לבחור בוול סטריט ג'ורנל או בוושינגטון פוסט, וחיים סבן השיב לו, השתגעת? רק פרסום בעיתון ישראלי יעזור לך להרעיד את המדינה ולפנות באמת ישירות לקוראים בישראל. סבן סיכם, אני חייב להודות שמה שקרה אחר כך התרחש במהירות שלא תיארתי לעצמי. השגריר אלוטייבה אכן בחר את העיתון שלנו, את ידיעות אחרונות, כדי לפנות לקוראים בישראל ולהסביר לו את העמדה של איחוד האמירויות. אי אפשר, כך הוא כתב, להמשיך בתוכנית הסיפוח ובמקביל לקוות לקשר טוב ולנורמליזציה עם העולם הערבי. מאמרו של השגריר זכה לכותרת הראשית באותו בוקר ועורר תגובות רבות בישראל ובעולם. רבים בישראל מעריכים כי למאמר הזה היה תפקיד מכריע בשינוי עמדתה של ישראל באשר להטלת הריבונות והסיפוח. עצירת המהלך בידי הממשלה הקודמת היה אחד הזרזים המשמעותיים לחתימת ההסכם. תהליך הנורמליזציה בין המדינות הגיע לשיאו חודשיים לאחר מכן, באותה הכרזה של נשיא ארצות הברית דאז טראמפ, ולאחר מכן בחתימה המפורסמת בבית הלבן. תפקידה החשוב ביותר של העיתונות הוא חשיפת האמת. העיתון שלנו, ידיעות אחרונות, הוא זה שחשף את ההסכם בין ארצות הברית לאיחוד האמירויות למכירת מטוסי F-35 מתקדמים החמקנים, שהיה בידיעתה ובהסכמתה של ישראל. ראש הממשלה דאז, מר נתניהו, הכחיש את הפרסום וכינה אותו חדשות מזויפות, פייק ניוז.
Mr. Netanyahu denied it and called it fake news, but we verified that the story is real and accurate. Both Emirati and American officials confirmed it. We then published several articles in Yedot Achronot. The articles argued that this is enhancing Israeli security. This is a deterrent against Iran. The UAE and Israel are on the road to becoming allies. Dear friends, newspaper editors throughout the world devoted most of their front pages in the past 2 years for the coronavirus pandemics, endless graphs, infographics detailing the spread of the virus, scope of infections, and death tolls. Peace agreement between Israel and the UAE and the normalization with Bahrain provided us with welcome and blessed respite, the opportunity to publish good news. A year ago, we were still hoping that the people of UAE would come and visit the holy city of Jerusalem and the metropolis of Tel Aviv, and that Israelis would see Burj Khalifa and visit the United Arab Emirates, admire the beauty of Abu Dhabi. A year ago, the thought of an Israeli sipping a cup of coffee in Dubai and reading Ittihad, or Emirates sitting in Tel Aviv and reading Yedot Achronot seemed like a distant dream, and here dreams come true. Assalamu alaikum wa shukran lakum.
Thank you very much. Our third speaker for this panel is Dr. Nir Boms. He's a research fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center, Tel Aviv University. He's the chairman of the Syria Research Forum and the Gulf Israel Policy Forum, as well as the coordinator of the TAU workshop on Israel and the Middle East and the Hiwar Forum for intra-regional dialogue. Dr. Boms received his doctorate from the University of Haifa. His dissertation analyzed the influence of information technology on the creation of civic society in Syria and Iran. He holds an MA degree in the fields of political science and Judaic studies from the University of Maryland. He currently teaches at the Rothberg School of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. In addition to Tel Aviv University, his 2016 book, Expecting Democracy, deals with the influence of expat communities on democracy discourse in the Middle East, and his recent book, The Syrian War Between Justice and Political Reality, was published in last year, 2020, by Cambridge University Press, is an edited volume on the Syrian War. So I'm very pleased to invite Dr. Boms to the floor. Thank you.
Take it.
Thank you very much, Liora. Shalom, אחר צהריים טובים, أهلاً وسهلاً وسلام لكل ضيوفنا من أبو ظبي. This is really a pleasure to be here and to experience these days with you. With your permission, I'll probably be slightly more conceptual in this short presentation and divide it into two. One, speak a little bit about the issue of media. I mean, I think I remember now Liora is giving us into the moods of quotes, and you remember Mark Twain, who says that when you read the newspaper, you are if you don't read the newspaper, you're not informed, and if you read the newspaper, you're misinformed. But this has been the media. If you recall the pictures, some of them I still remember as a child, and thereafter in history, the good old revolutions of the 70s and 80s and the 90s in a variety of places used to be, you know, where are we trying to conquer first is the TV tower. Because when we control the media, we control the mind. However, I think the contemporary media environment offers different challenges that it's important to conceptualize. This is a snapshot which I thought I found interesting from June of 2009. This is not the beginning of social media. This is already a decade into into this, or I guess not to all of this, but look at the proliferation of this. Different ideas and different platforms, but let's take a decade later and you realize something very interesting, which perhaps is somewhat symbolizes a bit of other trends. So we see less platforms and we see new empires, and in that sense, certainly very much Facebook, that have taken over the entire scene. So the process of globalization that has very much been completed with the media revolution has an interesting paradox in it. Because on the one hand, we now have access and we are now all at the same network and we can all really meet everyone. But when we go and analyze some of the studies and the algorithms, even though Facebook keeps on changing them, one of the most interesting things we see is that each one has its own social media world. And that world is not globalized, it's actually more localized. And most people see in their own feed all those who agree with them. And the algorithm will simply hide those who don't. And if you paid attention that if you're going somewhere, the algorithm will somehow knows you there, and if you look for something on the internet, the commercials will surely very soon follow. And we, as one of my colleagues call it, who works with many students and young people and analyze some of this, a generation of surfers, people who literally surf. They are highly opinionated about lots of things, and the same token, they are also highly misinformed. And this is a part of the realities that have brought some of the challenges associated, particularly with social media. And again, the media has changed, and the Middle East, the Arab world, and also us, most of the studies that I've seen have shown that we're all, although it took a few years to complete the revolution. Just to give you an example, in Egypt, 2000, 1 million cell phones. 2010, 60 million cell phones. And today, of course, like in any other country, there are far more cell phones than people. And then people get their news more and more through social media, with Facebook, the largest one, being in the lead, and then WhatsApp and YouTube. And this is also means that this is, again, the localized phenomena. Which group are you affiliated with? We can no longer control so easily the idea. The media tower doesn't matter so much, because even if we control it and we beam one thing, then it's very easy to establish another. This also created other problems. You know, we used to have a media revolution. Now we talk about social media revolutions. And when we speak about radicalizations in many places in the world, unfortunately, again, studies point us to the fact that media plays a role and not a positive role when it comes to that. Why? Because it's becoming easier to propagate hate. Here, we have seen that not so long ago with this issue like the naive intifada. But if you're going even further, perhaps one of the most radical but fascinating stories is the story of the Islamic States, of Daesh. Here you have a phenomena that brought people from over 60 countries who have never been in Syria and Iraq, and found their way through the virtual world to become a part of a very real war. And the process of radicalization that takes place is a dangerous process. And that has to do with the narrative or the narratives that has to do with media. Of course, this is not a very broad lecture about media, because what we are trying to do here is to discuss what can be done in the context of our agenda of promoting the Abraham Accords. And really, if I were to summarize it in 2 words, I speak about this. The real challenge that we have is how to show and demonstrate this mindset. For my summary of the vision of this entire move is moving from the win-lose and into the win-win. You know, in the Middle East, we were constantly we're stuck with this idea of win-lose. Somebody needs to win and somebody needs to lose. That's usually a part of history. That's how empires rise and fall. That's how wars are being fought. Somebody needs to win and somebody needs to lose. The problem is that certainly when we looked at the last decade, there are too many of us who were lost. I spent, as you've heard, 10 years on the crisis in Syria, and I can tell you that every Syrian I ever spoke with lost. Talking about every second Syrian loses his or her home, a third of the country become refugees outside the country, another third refugees inside the country, and similar stories can be said about Yemen, about big parts of Iraq, more recently about Lebanon. We have too many people who lost. And part of the reasons why they lost, which I think has to do with the new vision and in some ways also with the Abraham Accords, is the realization that radical agendas and intervention of radical players and attempts to create battles, radical battles that has to do with win and lose have dominated the space. And what we need to do is showing win-win. How do we need to show and what can we do with win-win? And this is perhaps connected to what we've heard from my two colleagues as well, focusing on the fact that the moves that we are involved with are there to create a win-win. A win-win in a variety of fields. But what is a win-win? It's a gestalt. It's a whole that is larger than the sum of its parts. I am making an agreement with you, not that I will gain and you will lose, that both of us will gain. Of course, it works on the business sphere, but it works on many other spheres. And I tried to just outline four main areas of where I think that this is the direction that we need to go through. So some people, and I think Professor Rabbi mentioned this yesterday, we tend to quote things and sometimes people tend to, well, what is this? Why tolerance, peace, prosperity? But no, this is true. The notion that the idea of tolerance can bring to peace and can bring prosperity is a very powerful one. Take another, just a recent example from Lebanon. We cannot delineate the maritime border between Israel and Lebanon, which means Lebanon cannot dig and extract gas from its own sea. Lebanon, with a depleting economy, with a pressure from Hezbollah not to do so, cannot be able to fix its economy, and it's not going to be able to go in a path of reconstruction. However, if we are able to do that in a scenario of the future, and we're able to help the Lebanese economy because we are delineating a line that now enables foreign companies to invest in it, then Lebanese will win. And if we're able to show, just like the ambassador quoted today, the number, the GDP that is now growing, the financial deals that are able to bring prosperity for both countries. We're talking about a region in the Middle East that, according to some of the predictions in 2030, there are over 100 million people without a job and they're unemployed. And if people who are without a job and unemployed, there is a good chance, again, we've seen some of that in other studies, the people who will pick them up are not necessarily the people who support the Abraham Accords. They will be picked up by radicals who will tell you, no, you are unemployed, you are poor, you need to be angry, and the easiest thing to do is to fight. But if we'll be able to show that we're actually able to produce prosperity, and so first of all, we have to produce it, and this is a part of the job that we have, and then we have to show it. And we have to show that what we're doing together improves the life and brings prosperity and brings people additional and new opportunities. I've been following the Arab Barometer for many years, since I think it was established, and it's always interesting to see that the UAE gets on the very top. And I think the last survey, it actually was in the top country among 16 countries, people aged 18 to 26. This is where people would like to live. Why? Because it's the land of opportunity. Because there is a realization that you can go there, even from Pakistan or from Lebanon or from Iraq, and you can find better life, you can find a degree of prosperity. This is a very important message. And it's a twofold. One of it is we have to do it. And the second thing, we have to talk about it. We have to show where we have succeeded and where life has improved. The second thing is we need to reframe, and media can play a very important role in that. This idea of what are the real challenges in this region. And the real challenges of the region are real. We have an Iran expert here, right? You can speak a lot about how Iran is dehydrating, how the Ornias lake is almost out of water. We may have another war between Egypt and Ethiopia because Egypt is thirsty. Water, global warming, these are real issues. Radicalization is a big issue. And this is something very much recognized by the UAE, but I think by any others, when you understand that when you have radicalization, when you have somebody now blowing a pipe that brings, let's say, oil or something else, then you're doing two things. First of all, you're hurting the prosperity of many others. It's much easier to blow something than to take it apart than to fix it. It's going to take much more difficult to fix than to destroy. But when you have radicalization, again, you are hurting the prospects of livelihood, prosperity, employment. So radicalization, the economy, the environmental threats, and again, coming back to the surveys that my colleague here, Fayed, is also very familiar with as a person who's doing data for trends, when you see like, what are people worried about? At the time, by the way, it was very interesting that ISIS, I think in 2015 and 16, was the #1 worry, concern of Arab youth. They realized, they saw it. And I think they saw it because a lot of that survey was done in many countries, including in the Gulf. They realized that what happens if this comes to me? This is something that threatens my life, if people like that will come my way. And the second and the third was really about unemployment, economy, stability. Because this is an understanding that without stability, you won't be able to have prosperity and you won't be able to have economy. The issues, the political issues came number 7 and number 8. I was really following that because it was very interesting for me to see where the Israeli-Palestinian conflict fits in all of this, and it fitted number 6, number 7, and number 8. And so we need to reframe the real challenges and showing that working together on the real challenges can, again, take us back to this idea of prosperity. We have to show that people-to-people connection can make life richer. We have to show, because eventually in the localized world, this is about us and everybody about himself. So we need to show that when we're engaging together, our lives become richer. We learn another language. We learn another culture. We have friends from other places. We can be brothers or sisters, just like I heard from Yaz yesterday, which she had her first Jewish friend in the age of 5. And in our localized world, we need to show that our engagement can make our life richer on a personal level. Make our life richer and make our life better, make our life more interesting. That, if I were to paraphrase and be romanticized for a second, that loving somebody makes more sense than hating him. So we need to show that win-win is possible, is doable, and is powerful. This is the path we need to frame in the media work. This is the path that I think needs to be shown by civic society groups that will be able to project the work that they do, by the people who do business, by the people who give interviews. And again, since the media is not divorced from all these narratives, and not all of it, of course, is supportive in this. I will just end by this. This is one of my favorite pictures I found at one point. And yes, you see, this is an old photo. And I think, and I would like to hope, that when we look at the Middle East, we can say that. This is an old photo. We're moving forward. We're trying to create a different world. But I want to end by a cautionary note, because this is easy to be optimistic, and it's easy to speak about the fact that the ambassador wrote an op-ed that can be read both at Yizachonot and Al-Ittihad. It's important for the sake of our people and the people in the UAE. But our real challenge is not here and not in the UAE. Our real challenge is elsewhere. Our real challenge is with the social media that is still vastly against a lot of what we're doing. Our real challenge is with the rest of the Middle East that is still very far from believing that peace can indeed bring prosperity. Our real challenge is with those who still believe that somebody needs to win and somebody needs to lose. There's tremendous challenge and tremendous work, but it warms my heart to know that we have great partners to do it with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have about 18 minutes for a session for Q&A. I should not touch it. Of course, Mr. El-Kabi is not here, so we won't be able to answer your questions, but my two colleagues here will try to do their best. Is there any question? One of our speakers? Or should I take my prerogative okay, go ahead, please. Oh, just a second. Yes, we will try. And can we just try, make sure.
That's a good idea. Okay. This is to Natalie Fnay and also to Nir. So the past year and the year before that, we saw a lot about Israeli relations with countries in the Gulf, about other Israeli relations with other countries in the Middle East. My name is Joshua Krasna, Dr. Joshua Krasna. I'm a researcher at the Moshe Dayan Center, and I'm also a former diplomat. And one of the things that that's been engaging me for the past 2 years, and by the way, which is very much pointed up to me by what's going on with Sudan now, is as Nir and as all the speakers, there's been real progress here, but it's been sold perhaps to the Israeli public as even more than there's been. In other words, there's been about, but there's been a little more. One of the examples, for instance, is that up until 2 days ago, everybody talked about the 4 normalizations until the revolution in Sudan occurred, and then everybody realized that there were only 3. So one of the questions I have is to what extent in the Israeli, apart from what's really going on, right, Nir, this is how much of this is in the past 2 years has been affected by Israeli politics and by things that people were trying to either expand or perhaps lahadhed, right? Perhaps to make even more than the things that were actually going on. And to what extent is this, could this be leading in Israel to perhaps a disappointment from the process that has begun a year ago?
Well, there were greater people than I who explained that all politics is local. And of course, when you have something like this very significant, it is used also as a political vehicle. We've seen it in Israel, we've seen it in the United States. It has been sort of debating for a while whether they can even use the term Abraham Accords or not, until I think gladly I'm happy to say that it is finally more adopted. And the same thing here. Also, in the Israeli discourse, in the very complex political reality, I think there are many people who were happy to of course, the Abraham Accords are received with I think, tremendous support. This has been a sign of relief. But for many people, they said, well, look at this. If somebody recognized it's all about us. And I'm not sure that they paid attention that there is a much larger move here in the region. And what is happening with us is a part of that move. But that's not the purpose of this move. There is an attempt of creating a new alliance in the region. Alliance of moderates that needs to work together, that needs to understand each other so they can move forward with an understanding that on the one hand we have common threats, and I'm not talking just about the enemies or just Iran, because people here were very much always focused about this. We're talking about all the broader issues. I mentioned some of them, the radicalization, but also the other challenges in the region, the economic challenges, the environmental challenges, everything that needs to happen here, with the realization that if we're not going to move and change course, they're going to tackle us as well. And then the other axis is the axis of opportunities. This is, yes, things, we can be disappointed. We have seen revolutions in the Middle East. We have seen counter-revolutions in the Middle East. I have a sense that this process, we have seen a certain dance, and overall it's going in an important, positive direction. And I think if it would not have been the case, we would not be here. But on the other hand, We should not disillusion ourselves to say this is all fait accompli. We have a lot of work to do. We need to build this, and we need to make our own adjustments. And we need to also remember that this is an opportunity given to us to make sure that we will be able to move on many fronts, including, by the way, the Palestinian front, because that's the way to eventually create a win-win. A lot of it will depend on the actions. Sudan may come to the fold or not come to the fold. There may be other countries. But broadly speaking, the UAE took a very significant bet. And what it needs to see is the fruits of this concept of win-win. It needs to be able to show, it wants to be able to show, and we would like to be able to show as well, that what we've done here made the life of more people in this region better. If I were to put it as simple as that. If we'll be able to succeed in doing that, I think we'll be able to take the same direction and move forward. If eventually we won't be able to do that because of radicalization, political stubbornness, or other circumstances, then it can go backwards. We're only at the beginning, and we have a lot of work to do.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to add?
I believe gave a complete answer.
Okay, so I would like to ask anyone else? Okay, please, sir. Just a second, we'll make sure. No, the problem is for the recording.
The question is, how do you cover news? Dhabi, Dubai, and so on. In other words, do you have a correspondent there, or do you travel? How do you cover it?
שאלה טובה. אני עונה לך בעברית ברשותך. אין לנו היום כתב באבו דאבי ובדובאי.
We don't have a reporter in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Sometimes we send, occasionally we send reporters for the festive declaration, for example, of the signing of the accords. We did send a reporter. But the way media works today, because of the internet and the revolutionary ways that media works, media doesn't have reporters in each and every capital in the world. We have reporters in major capitals, and the importance of being on the ground has been diminished. Once there were reporters who screened the local newspapers and reported back to their editors. Today, we can access local newspapers via the internet. We don't have to have a person physically in each and every country. And there are freelance reporters, and we can use them, of course. Of course, ideally, we would have someone in each and every capital, but we have a good also cooperation between Yediot Ahronot and Al-Ittihad. We have our resources in Europe and United States. We don't have someone based in the UAE, and it works well. أنا لست متأكدة من أن الجميع حصلوا على الإجابة لأن الترجمة كانت الإنجليزية فقط. تم سؤال نيتا إذا كان هناك مراسل ليدعوت أحرنوت أو أي جريدة محلية إسرائيلية متواجد في الإمارات العربية المتحدة، فكان
in different places that can be sent if and when necessary to cover news there. And of course, nowadays with the technology and the connection through the internet, a lot of communication is being handled, and it overcomes the distance. So I hope that I covered more or less the question and the answer. Thank you. Any other question? Yes, please. Ofra. Yes. Oh, this is instead of the gym today, covering the mileage, and my watch is counting the steps.
I hope it works, yes. My question is to you, Nir. We all know that social media is two-edged sword. So is there any way to try and, to take the better part of social media to mobilize people for better things? Or it's just you have to let it go as it is?
Well, there's a lot to say on social media, and it's not necessarily just a double-edged sword. Social media, unfortunately, aside of other things, it's also a business. And the more you invest in it, and the more visibility you get. So I think it's important that the people who are engaged in the right type of work will find the ways how to make it more visible. I think there are ways for stakeholders to make sure that this work is becoming more visible. And I think there's also good things that are happening that may have not gotten the right visibility, because perhaps the instinct broadly of media, it's a little bit like dog bites men or men bites dogs. So if there is, sometimes we are used to conflicts, and that's what we do. But when people are actually speaking or doing something more positive, that not necessarily needs to be news. So it needs to be pushed. There are ways to push social media. There are tremendous efforts by radical forces to do that, and I think we need to have more efforts by the people who believe in this agenda to really push this, and also to challenge the narratives that are coming, on the other hand, particularly when they're not true. But another part of it, and I will just end with this, is to also, it's not just about the narrative, it's also about the actions. We need to show that we're able to deliver the win-win, we're able to create it, and then we need to make sure it's reported.
I want to add that for many years, the media is being led by perhaps a premise that if it bleeds, it leads. And conflicts and wars get the headlines. And I think methodologically, and this is where research can come in, is that we have to start and work and think of how to operate to advance and maintain peace. And this is something that we have to see how we transform ourselves and our minds from a media in times of war and conflict to a media in times of peace. And this is something I don't think we know. We hope for peace. We even sing in the tikva for peace, but we somehow forgot how to live in peace. So this is something both the media and ourselves has to adjust to. I know that it's easier said than done, but we have to start somewhere. So please, you have a question?
Yes.
Hassan, right? Salam alaikum. Alaikum salam.
I heard the center of this meeting is communication, dialogue, peace, and so on and so on. Iran mentioned, Sudan mentioned, United States mentioned, so many countries mentioned. And these countries are far away from us. They are not our neighbors. The one mentioned one time only, you mentioned it just 5 minutes ago, Palestine. Our problem is with our neighbors. They are just outside our doors. The question is, was this deliberately ignored? Thank you.
Well, Hassan, first of all, thank you for being
حسن
here.
شكرا لكونك معنا هنا اليوم في
30% of our colleagues, both students and professors, are Palestinians. You are correct. The Palestinian issue is very much here. But I think the reason perhaps why it is not so much present is that, if I were to give my own opinion, is that the will for engagement has not been visible. And it may be not even in my place to comment on all of these issues, but there have been many examples, and I'll just give you perhaps one of two. Even last year, when there was an important COVID collaboration, also between Israel and the UAE, and when the UAE actually brought an entire plane with COVID relief for the Palestinians, and the Palestinians Authority flat outly rejected it, and gave a message that the issue of tatbiyah and non-engagement is more important than human lives, I think somebody in the leadership on the Palestinian side gave the message, not to us, but also to our friends, that we just don't want to engage. There have been, unfortunately, many other examples as such. And this I can tell you as somebody who spent many years working with Palestinian colleagues, including those who would like to see peace. And unfortunately, some of these messages were as such that the strength of the voice and the endorsement for the boycott movement meant that even people like me, who were deeply engaged with Palestinian voices, who would like to find the way for peace and prosperity, were banned. Because if you are running a peace movement or a peace meeting to try to figure out peace, you are now normalization. And I think what had happened here, there was perhaps a need to think differently and show that we need to move forward in the Middle East. And we cannot get ourselves hostage to people who may not want to move. And perhaps the message that we've heard on this issue from some of our colleagues was that we now have a different model, and perhaps some people will find a way to join. We absolutely need to do our part. And I said that, and I will say it again. We need to use this energy and momentum in order to bring a win-win here as well. But we cannot do it alone.
Okay, is there any last question? Yes, I'll just make sure that the mic is being handed to you. Oh. Thank you, and this will be the last question. Okay.
So first, thank you to both of you for coming and speaking to us. And my question is for Dr. Nir. So over the past year, we've seen a lot of content on social media regarding the normalization of relations and everything, but sadly, students worldwide have been focusing on the negative reactions to the deals. So what can we as advocates and students do to be able to show the people what is actually good about it and how to educate them?
So, thank you for the question, because you just validated one of the things I've seen before. Social media works in silos. And sometimes it's too easy for us to be very happy with our own silo because, it works like this. You look at the social media feed and you don't understand why somebody disagrees with you, because the entire world that you see on your social media feed agrees with you. You don't see the one who don't agree with you because that belongs to another silo. What can be done? The two things needs to be done. First of all, you need to be more active, but the other thing is you need to be more engaging. You need to find and get to the other side, to the people who are not a part of your circle. You have to figure out how to engage and create people-to-people circles and move and go to the places that are not usually there. In the social media, you can do it. I was just in Expo a few days ago and began to explore an idea of how we can have a circle there when the entire world, the entire Arab world is there. And I belong to those people who end up, whatever it is, whether it's in the UAE, but also where it's in Egypt, I would go to speak to the Saudis or the Syrians and find a way to find the bridge and find a way to cross to the other side. When you do that and you're able to get beyond your silo, you need to make sure that you first of all understand that what you see in your own circle is not the entire world. And if you're able to go to the other side, then the challenge is how to engage them. And I think it's another perhaps opportunity to remind all of us that while we are sitting here and we, justifiably so, we are happy, we are celebrating. This is an amazing moment that we can sit here with colleagues from the Middle East, from the UAE, from Israel, together in Tel Aviv. And yesterday we had people in an event asking questions from Morocco, from Bahrain, from the middle of Egypt. It's wonderful. But you are right. This is not the majority yet. Not everybody are with us. We have a lot of work of reaching out. We need to show them that what we're trying to do here is to bring a better future to the people of this region. We need to show them that this is not about win-lose, it's about win-win. We need to show them that this is not about pushing the Palestinians aside and not finding a solution to their problems. It is about trying to find a path for a better future for all of us. It's a big vision, it's a big challenge, and we need to keep on hammering at it. And thank you for trying to do this.
Okay, thank you very much for last note. I want to thank our presenters today, Mr. El-Kabi and Neta Livne and Dr. Nir Boms, thank you very much, and of course to you for attending. We will have a 15-minute break, and we will convene to the last session of the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to our final session of the day. I'm sure you'll all agree it's been a very interesting and productive day. We started a little late, so which is probably my fault, as I'm the moderator. So we'll try and push on fairly quickly. I'll just briefly introduce each speaker as according to the agenda. And our first speaker is my colleague, who some of you know well, Eliazia Al-Hossani. She's the head of the media department at Trends Research and Advisory, and she's over here in Tel Aviv at the Moshe Dayan Center for a few months working as a researcher. So without any further ado, Yaz, if you'd like to continue. Thank you.
Distinguished audience and friends, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, Shalom Alechem, and peace be with you all. It is both an honor and a privilege for me, as an Emirati female researcher, to be invited to take part in this panel today. I would like to start off my speech with a statement made by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi and Deputy Supreme Commander of the UAE's Armed Forces, during the signing of the Document of Human Fraternity in February 2019 in Abu Dhabi. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan said, "The world is large enough for us all, and diversity is a source of richness, not a cause for conflict or fighting. God has created us differently to complement each other and to know one another and cooperate for good, peace, and development of all." I think this statement puts the approach of normalization of UAE's relations with Israel into perspective. UAE is known to be one of the most peaceful, developed, and diverse countries in the region. The signing of the peace agreement and the normalization of relations with Israel to any serious observer of the UAE's policies will not be surprised. The agreement is a natural outcome of the UAE's approach to tolerance, moderation, and acceptance of the other, irrespective of religion, race, and ideology. It has been a year since the signing of the Abraham Accords, during which I have visited Israel twice. I'm here today to share my thoughts on the progress made since the announcement of the Accords in 2020, as well as future opportunities for advancing relations between UAE and Israel in the fields of development and technology. Relations between the UAE and Israel have steadily improved since the signing of the Abraham Accords. Trade between the two countries is expected to reach $1 billion by the end of the year and $6.5 billion by 2025. Financial projections estimate that bilateral trade will reach almost $1 trillion over the next decade. To institutionalize the development partnership, the Emirati and Israeli governments have concluded several groundbreaking trade agreements and economic cooperation deals. For example, they signed a comprehensive agreement on economic and trade cooperation in June 2021 that includes free flow of goods and services, as well as cooperation regarding trade fairs, exchange of experts and knowledge, including delegations, and cooperation in standardization and regulation, encouraging cooperation of the private sector. In January 2021, an agreement for visa-free travel was inked and came into force this month. A few days ago, the UAE, US, and Israel agreed on establishing 2 working groups on religious coexistence and on water and energy issues. Israel's involvement at Expo 2020 is extremely important. It's a unique opportunity to deepen and develop business, diplomatic, tourism, and cultural cooperation between both Israel and the UAE. The establishment platforms and joint ventures will enable Emiratis and Israelis to co-develop the next disruptive technologies for the region and the world. There are a number of good opportunities between the UAE and Israel in areas of ranging from energy, artificial intelligence, AI, cybersecurity, and water to agriculture. To begin with, the UAE and Israel are roughly $4 billion strongly economies. The UAE exports certain things the Israelis have to import. And with Israel's tech and startup capacity, the UAE offers a real opportunity for Israel to get a foothold not just in Europe and Asia, but in North Africa and the Middle East. In addition, both the UAE and Israel are leaders in emerging clean tech. Israel is ranked second in the latest Global Clean Tech Innovation Index, whereas the UAE is a world leader in renewable energy and a home of Masdar City, one of the world's most environmentally friendly cities, as well as the Middle East's first carbon capture and storage facility. Joint initiatives and projects between the two parties, such as the Middle East Aquarius, KIP, herald a vibrant future for a clean tech covenant. In addition to the prospects of linking power grids and developing natural gas markets, the UAE-Israel partnership has the potential to build a greener Middle East. This partnership is based upon Israel's technological capabilities and the UAE's world's leading advances in sustainable urban living. There are expectations that UAE-Israeli deals in greener technology will exceed $500 million over the next 5 years, as both Israel and the UAE have already taken steps in the field of artificial intelligence, and a few important collaborations have already begun, such as the partnership in creating an anti-drone AI system. There are opportunities and potential collaborations in this field. Both countries have interests in embedding AI within the fields of security, combating terrorism, economies, and governmental needs. Further opportunities lie ahead in the academic field, computing resources and information exchange, while the UAE shows exceptional capabilities in governmental management in the fields. Israel leads in the startup culture. And while Israel has a large number of talented and experienced AI professionals, the UAE has a better ability to allocate budgets for the required infrastructure and other resources to be used for joint projects. Considering the challenges agriculture conditions facing both countries, there is immense potential of advancing R&D and agri-tech innovation, together to create more sustainable and resilient food systems. Further, there is a potential for collaboration between the UAE and Israel on cyber defense of their digital spheres, a vital component for a reboost digital economy. Cybersecurity is not only a shared strategic threat for Israel and the UAE, but also a huge opportunity to become a growth engine for both economies. In conclusion, I think the Abraham Accords will help foster technological cooperation between the UAE and Israel and economic development in two countries. More importantly, the UAE-Israeli partnership can play a major role in advancing technological and sustainable developments in the entire Middle East. When speaking about the prospects and cooperation, development, and technology, it is promising to say that peace and technology is the bridge to the 21st century and a lens for the better tomorrow and a better Middle East. We will be talking in depth about this in a book, in a joint book with Moshe Dayan, with Dr. Uzi Rabi, and Trends Research and Advisory. Also, do not forget, the common denominator between both nations is that we both hold the Middle Eastern identity. But how can we use that commonality to better build the idea of peace with those that disregard the transformation shaping the world around us and prefer to repeat the same tired slogan as though they were inescapable fates? Thank you so much. Tuda Ruba.
Hey, thanks so much, Eliazia. Very brief and insightful as usual. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to invite Ksenia Svetlova, who is the director of the program on Israel-Middle East relations at the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policies, as we know as MITFEM, of course. Please, Ksenia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
مساء الخير أرحب بالجميع السلام عليكم. I would like first to extend my gratitude to those who organized this phenomenal symposium. I do know, because I organized it some time, a few of those, that it's tremendous work. So thank you very much for Moshe Dayan Center, for Trends, and it's good to be here. Before I will start with the topic of my speech, I would like to refer to something that was mentioned earlier in the previous session, and I think that it needs to be attended a little bit more. There was a remark, I do not remember unfortunately by whom, that a lot had happened during these years between the development of relations between the UAE and Israel, but the media made much more of it than it actually is. So I can tell you, as somebody who is watching very, very closely, the development of what is happening now, but also what had happened before, during the last 20 years. As an active reporter on the ground, as a member of Knesset, then as a researcher, I can tell you that what is happening between our countries is phenomenal. Nothing less than that. It's historical. It's historical to the degree that after, covering for so many years, violent outbreaks of anti-Semitism and hatred all around the region, what we are experiencing now, it's an historical development that does not get enough attention. I can tell you that every such meeting, like what we're having right now, every collaboration, every MOU that is being signed, this is history. This is history that is happening at this moment. And now, in regards to the topic of this session, development and technological development and the cooperation between us, well, I remember about 20 years when I was just graduated from the Hebrew U. I studied Middle Eastern Studies there. I was very excited to read the Arab newspapers. Some of them it was very hard for me to read as an Israeli because there was a lot of expressions of hatred and so on. But one article caught my mind. It was published in Egyptian Al Aram. And the author asked a question. Why, in the Arab world, why don't we have Al-Nahda? Al-Nahda not in the meaning of the Islamic revival, but in the meaning of revival. Why is the Arab world in such a sorry state? Why is the income so low? Why do people live in poverty? And the answer to this question that dealt, for once in a while, it dealt with something internal that was happening in the Arab Middle East, was remarkable. This is science. We are missing the science. How can we go back to the era of Ibn Sina, Ibn Khwarizm, people who invented algebra, who invented modern medicine as it is, this golden era that many people in the Middle East are longing for it. It was characterized not only by immense wealth or by wars, it was characterized by scientific development. It was characterized by governments putting a lot of money into research, sponsoring researchers, sponsoring academic research. First universities, yes, they were created in the Middle East, not somewhere in some other place. So I was thinking about it, many times during my career, and right now, when we are speaking today about the technological and scientific cooperation and collaboration between our countries, well, I'm saying that yes, it's a shame that it didn't happen before. But it thanks God, alhamdulillah, that this is happening now. Because we see that in Israel, we are very much, as you know, oriented towards, scientific development, high-tech, it's known around the world, but also the UAE, things that happened there during the last couple of decades, and I think the roots are way before in the heritage of Sheikh bin Zayed. It's, of course, the looking forward, looking to the science, developing everything that you can imagine, from water facilities to sending a mission to Mars. You also have it in Israel, and you also have it now in UAE. So a lot of things had happened during this year, and my colleague Eliazid, she mentioned a lot of the projects that already are progressing well. I would like to perhaps underline as fair that right now is still, it didn't get so much publicity, and it was not addressed, I think, as much in the mass media, because usually the academic sphere, what can we do? It's less glossy than MOUs between, billion worth companies and so on. But nevertheless, the knowledge lies here. It lies in the academy. I witnessed a few months ago in the IDC, the first Emirati student that was enrolled to studies in the IDC, which is now Rahman University. We know about researchers that are now involved here in Moshe Dayan, also in Haifa University, and so on. We know about MOUs between think tanks that were signed, of course, your collaboration. Also some advancement that we in Mitvim have made with the Bahraini Buhuth, and others, but we need so much more. What we need to have happened, actually, right now, is perhaps to concentrate on taking this cooperation to the next step, and to launch a real cooperation in various fields, from humanities to science, medicine, practical mathematics, and everything, in order to increase common scientific research that will be published in A-list academic journals in the West, because let me tell you, I was born in the Soviet Union a long time ago, as you know. There was a Soviet Union, and Russia today, it inherited, unfortunately, the mindset of the Soviet Union that said that we are efficient for ourselves. What we are writing it in Russian because we do not need anybody else, basically, yes? In the Middle East, in some countries, what happens is the same. I see wonderful researchers, but they're publishing only in Arabic. It doesn't go anywhere, okay? Now, I do see already researchers by Emirati experts in various fields that are being published abroad. Many of them, people also study abroad, but we need to do much more, because this is the way forward. This kind of cooperation, it's also long-lasting, and therefore it brings, on the table the cooperation and enhances it between specific people. It's not only a peace like what we have, it's a blessed peace, but still it's a cold peace between governments, between us and Egypt, between us and Jordan. But this is a real peace. This is a real deal. These are people who are writing academic paper together. Do you know what it is? It's harder than having a baby in a couple. And I have three, I should know. To produce a book together, forget about it. This is years of common work, of common labor. So apart from bringing people closer together, researchers from, similar field, you also get more collaboration, exchange of ideas, and getting to the next step of scientific advancement that we are so badly need here in the Middle East. The last point that I would like to say is, of course, the regional perspective. This is very important. It was mentioned here a few times, I think. And I would like to say it again. Look at what is happening around us. The situation is very dire. We are surrounded by failed states. We are surrounded by weak states that are not going anywhere because we know that they are hardly balancing in order to provide food for their people. Sometimes you just cannot help because some states, what can you do? They are just, keep shooting into their own legs. And it's not possible to do something for them. But for other states, it's still possible. And we always need to keep in mind that we need this regional approach because as successful as we are, we will not be able to do it if everything else will be lying in ruins, So I am a huge believer in the Abraham Accords. I also believe that we need to expand them. I think we need to bring more actors slowly but surely to involve them in this circle that it's always, sometimes it's called, like in a very neglecting way, the circle of normalizers. No, it's the circle of people who believe in peace, they believe in prosperity, they believe in hard work, because without hard work, nothing can happen here. And I do think that this positive example, it will sink after some time. The media issues, the campaigns that are launched against the UAE, against this cooperation, they will probably continue. This is how the world acts. But we need to go forward, just as my friend Dr. Nirbaum said. Nevertheless, we have to go forward and continue moving all the time, because if you don't move, you go back. This is the nature of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ksenia. And I'd like to endorse what you said about this agreement being the real deal. there's certainly a very strong sense this agreement, the Abraham Accords, is not just a kind of exchange of texts between governments, but it is a real meeting of minds and a genuine relationship that will be built on shared interests. I mean, speaking as a British national resident in the UAE, I've been impressed. There's immense interest in the UAE, in Israel. I mean, in terms of formal cooperation, but just basically visiting the country, getting to know the culture better. So, from my perspective, as someone who's been resident in the UAE for a long time, but knows it, I know it quite well, is this relationship is going places. I think it's going to be much more than a cold peace as you described it. So just I should move on quickly to our last speaker, Dr. Paul Rivlin, who is senior fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center. Dr. Rivlin, the floor is yours, please. Thank you.
I'm going to talk about technology, but I just have to make some adjustments here to use it. Here we are. I'm going to talk about technology and the possibilities for cooperation between the UAE and Israel and some other models. But before I begin, I just want to say my concept of technology is that it's mainly up here. It's mainly imagination, scientific and technological knowledge, some degree of experience, but perhaps not too much, not conditioned experience, but experience which can be adapted, and that requires the imagination. And then lying around something that we're going to examine, of course, is the environment in which all this takes place. So where is technology going? I'll try and have a look at that. What about ecosystems, the environment for firms, national systems, education, technological education, and where does this lead in terms of cooperation between Israel and the UAE? To what extent can we say anything useful about where technology is going? By its very nature, the future is unknown. I'm always being asked what's going to happen, and I generally tell my wife that I have no idea. But we can identify frontier technologies where, to a certain extent, trends from the past move forward, and these have been identified, and I'll talk a bit more about them, with phenomenal growth. The investment in 11 technologies that in 2018 took 350 billion is expected in 2025 to take 3.2 trillion dollars. So we're talking about exponential growth of investment in certain fields. And I have tried to use here different sources and different methods to see what they are. You won't be able to, maybe you can see this, but we've got a list of the technologies that are at the cutting edge. The first is perhaps AI, artificial intelligence. From what I read in the newspapers, we now have artificial intelligence on the battlefield, in the laboratories for the battlefield, as well as for civilian applications. I read that in Dubai, the metro doesn't have human drivers, and in Israel, we don't have any metro yet. So let's see where we go. I remember when I was doing my doctorate in going backwards and forwards from Egypt, somebody said, you see, we've got a metro, the French are building it. I said, yeah, and we're going to build it ourselves, and it'll take, pharaonic time. Blockchain, drones, 5G, 3D printing, gene editing, IoT, the Internet of Things, is unbelievable. And some of these fields, I find it very difficult to get my head round. Big data, well, that's more my cup of tea being an economist. Robotics, that's what I sometimes think that I am. Nanotechnology, well, my son works in that, so I'm supposed to understand it. And everything to do with sun power. And here, obviously, Israel and the UAE are, out there in the front. What about the trends on the Israeli side? I'm going to inevitably say more about Israel. Where's the foreign investment been? Well, if we draw a map of it, and this is from an official government report, we can see that it's concentrated in terms of numbers of companies in AI, and if you use a different measure, percentage of capital raised, then maybe you'd get food tech. But you can see this agglomeration of fintech, industry in general, digital health. Here there is and there will be enormous room for cooperation between Israel and the UAE in terms of hospitals. I know there are links already. Agrotech, I listened to the UAE Minister for Environment, a very impressive lady talking about project using seawater for growing foodstuffs, the whole chain. In Abu Dhabi, it was last night in a webinar. Communications, e-transport, the revolution in transportation, which you in the UAE are well ahead of us in Israel. This is one of our big weak points, but perhaps we will feel the gains in the future. And then if we make this a little more up to date, we get a slightly different pattern. We've got to be very careful making these comparisons, because here in 2020, provisional figures suggest that the biggest sector is cyber. We were talking about that before. This seems to me unbelievably important. I mean, it's almost there. If we want to live in this world, we need safe cyber in the same way as we need safe water. Every day we're seeing part. It's shown, highlighted certain competitive advantages that we have here. Now, what about the readiness? What about the framework within which this takes place? Well, here you see Israel at the bottom of the top group in terms of what's called the frontier for technological development, which is a ranking of skills, R&D, ICT, I mean, basic skills. Can people use digital equipment? Can kids, can adults in any particular country? The ranking in terms of R&D, the industry ranking, the finance ranking, all weighted to give you a total score. Again, this is from the United Nations, and we score number 20, not, of course, where we would want to be, but not bad, not bad. And the UAE scores 42 in the ecosystem report. This is a measure of the system that supports the technological development. And perhaps that reflects that the fact that we've been going at it, I suspect, longer, and we've been, the high tech of today is based on the tech of yesterday. that is also an upper middle ranking according to this criteria. If you change the criteria, you get slightly different ranking. Now, another differentiation between the two countries is in the amount of foreign investment inflows. And you will find Israel somewhere below the middle, getting a lot of foreign investment, as I indicated before, and the foreign investment here is increased. Foreign investment in Israeli tech has transformed the whole economy, but that's a story for another time. And we benefit from the inflow of this foreign money. But if we look at the outflows, then we see that the UAE figures significantly as a source of finance. And that leads one to ask all sorts of questions. Firstly, it suggests that the UAE has a progressive policy of investing abroad where appropriate, and that means you've got an open economy. And my impression is the UAE has had an open economy for longer than Israel has had, okay, because we've gone through a lot of periods some time ago of centralized control over foreign capital coming in or out, and we've ended that. We now have a liberal system, but the UAE has had a liberal system really from a very long time, and that's reflected in these figures. But the other thing is that it suggests that you've got sources of funds. I mean, you've got oil wealth and other sources of funds that make you financially powerful. And at the moment, the funds are being optimized by being transferred abroad. And I would suspect over time that a greater share of them will be used at home as the economy develops. And we hear so much about the astonishing pace of development there. A cautionary note. All economic development involves what's called, and this is a real euphemism, creative destruction. And, you know, those who've studied economic history know about the Luddites. New technologies destroy old technologies, and they destroy skills on the way. And this is a process that in different countries at different times can cause great difficulty. It can also lead to the development of sclerotic vested interests trying to block new developments from coming in. I can think of a number of interesting examples in Israel, but tact will leave me to push them aside just for the moment. But the important point to note is that this whole process that we're talking about of new technology and all this fantastic stuff involves some people losing out. And the key to success seems to me at the political level of making sure that you do not exclude large or significant sections of the population, that you bring everybody in so that everybody gains, so that everybody has a vested interest in this very difficult process of change. Now, changing the story completely, there are articles in the newspapers regularly about the development of trade between Israel and the UAE. And it shows that the UAE sells more to Israel than it buys. And the reason that it shows this is because the figures are on two-way trade are only issued for goods, things that you can see, commodities. Okay? We do not have bilateral figures for trade in services. And practically everything these days that's of any significance is a service. All the stuff we've been talking about is a service. Okay, this computer in front of me is a good, it's a commodity in terms of the metal and the plastic. But the brains inside it, the software and the communication is all, of course, services. And that is where Israel, as you can see, sells twice as much as it does in goods. And that would apply to the trade with UAE. All that we read is business being conducted in terms of cyber and AI and knowledge. And that isn't in the trade figures. So when you come to compare and look at what's going on, I just urge, you know, to be cautious. Now, I'll almost at the end. The Israeli Innovation Institute, which is a government-backed body, issued a report recently on the prospects for Israel and the UAE. And as far as officials can go in expressing an opinion, they wrote this, and I'm going to read it. Israel and the UAE share a similar mindset on the necessity of innovation, research, science, and technology as the pillars of a knowledge-based, highly productive and competitive economy. Both countries focus on an approach driven by entrepreneurs in a business-friendly environment where public and private sectors form effective partnerships. It's not often that you'll find a country willing to put forth public resources and forward-looking regulatory frameworks to promote high-risk innovation for inclusive growth and diversification, ultimately encouraging its local talent, despite the risk and the high chance of failure, to pursue applied R&D, entrepreneurship, and innovation. While both countries have some weaknesses in the tech innovation space, their strengths complement each other and subsume the potential for creating a superpowered technological partnership. UAE is consistently ranked higher than Israel in its institutions, political and regulatory environment, and infrastructure. Israel consistently holds the top global spots on particular G11 innovation facets such as VC, R&D, entrepreneurship, high-tech production, while the UAE is ranked consistently low in knowledge and technology outputs. Now that leads me to my final words, and this is how I began. It's all about people. And the stability of the system is all about including people and not excluding them, and that's why government makes the difference. Here is an advert, recent advert, for recruiting young Emiratis and what the government is prepared to do to help encourage people to move into the technological sector. The government in the UAE, forgive me, I'm not sure if this is the federal government. I think it is. It is the federal government. So, there you're going, that even more reinforces what I'm saying. The governments realize that they need to intervene, they need to support. It doesn't happen on its own. And the other point is the one I'm making here, that it's about people. It's about people because technology is up here, but instability is when people are excluded. And in case we Israelis get too big-headed, which is sometimes a problem, I would point out that our high-tech sector employs about 330,000 people, okay? And we had 13,000 unfilled tech positions in the end of last year. Obviously, the last year has been a difficult one. In other words, only 7.5% of Israeli workforce is in high-tech. All this wonderful stuff we're talking about is a tiny section of our economy, although it's a very big section of our exports. And the government wants to target that up to 15%. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rivlin. Very, very interesting presentation. For me, it's interesting to note that in the Emirati case, the emphasis on the kinds of sectors you were focusing on, new tech, it's very much part of the government's diversification strategy, which has been increasingly prioritized the last few years. Of course, the Emirates the economies have been highly dependent on oil and gas exports, but it's been central to government strategy to diversify and to put in place practical measures, incentives to breed this, to nurture this new generation of tech proficient entrepreneurial groups that are now coming through, and we're certainly seeing results of that in terms of new startups and other ventures. So the floor is open now. I think we have a little sort of 12, 30 minutes perhaps for questions, discussion. I think I'm on mic duty, so I'm going to have to run around a bit, I guess. Oh, thank you. Thanks. Nia.
Thank you. Economic development and youth unemployment, I think, are two of the most pressing issues in the Middle East. Speaking now about two countries who have done quite a lot in terms of development and can offer quite a lot in terms of technology. That's something that can potentially contribute to this win-win. But any of you have an idea of how can the UAE and Israel somehow work together for the benefit of economic development and youth employment in the region?
I think that's just my very brief observation. It's an absolutely key issue, and I think I think both Israel and the UAE could do much to perhaps share the lessons they've learned, and in terms of youth unemployment, I think it's other countries in the region which are facing this demographic bulge, this looming crisis, young populations, and shortages of gainful employment in many sectors. Perhaps I could give this to the panel, Dr. Rivlin, or do you have any comments on this?
I read yet again about an interesting idea, and that is to set up in Jordan, in southern Jordan, an electricity farm. Israel needs the power and doesn't have the land. Jordan needs the water. You need the electricity for the desalination. And of course, what also comes out of this is employment. And the political climate between Israel and Jordan has improved for some odd reason in the last few months. But here, it seems, again, I don't know anything about the politics, certainly within the Arab world, but it seems to me that this might benefit from the involvement of the UAE in some way. You know, as a joint provider of the technology, as a sponsor, as an interested party. I don't know, because there are all sorts of complications there that, you know, an Israeli economist wouldn't be aware of. But this seems to me not just win-win, but win-win-win-win. I'm very much aware from visits there that, you know, in Jordan there's public opinion and political opinion which is against anything. It's the old, you know, if you win, we lose, and that's it, not a win-win. But on the other hand, I noticed that when tourism from Israel recovered into Aqaba, people there were very interested in a win-win situation. So maybe it's something that in some formal or informal way Israel could talk to Jordan and to the UAE about and do a kind of a joint three-way project.
Ksenia, yeah, you want?
Yes, if I may add, the expanding of the Abraham Accords means exactly that. There are countries here in the region, again, you know, that Lebanon is a sad example. You cannot do much due to malign Iranian influence there and other reasons. You cannot do much to help the country. However, the Israel's long-term partners for peace, countries such as Egypt and Jordan, and the new country that joined also the last year to the peace accords, which is Morocco. These are definitely countries who are partners to the vision of peace and stability here in the region. Dr. Rivlin was now referring to Jordan. Yes, well, indeed, Jordan is an immediate case, which you think that, it's obvious that the goods made flow from Israel to the Gulf via Jordan. You know, this seems so basic. And then you think about, of course, you know, the rail, which was a long-term dream of various Israeli governments, that there was no political environment that was suited this dream. But now there is. And there could be, multiple projects in which these countries can be involved. And I can tell you that already we have this very positive sign that there is a change in mood, in regional mood towards this kind of projects and in general cooperation with Israel, which was the Egyptian, surprising, I would say, offer, to expand the trade with Israel. When was the last time, Professor Rabi, you know this, when Egypt suggested to expand, the trade? I think 79 or something like this, yes? But not since then, yes? But I think this is exactly the effect of the Abraham Accords on our surrounding, when other countries see that there are only benefits. There are no negative sides. So why not join on this wagon? Why not jump to this process? So, but again, you need a regional perspective, and you need always to think that although our bilateral relations are important, but elevating and improving the situation in countries who are partners regionally, this could benefit everybody.
Yes, yeah.
I would like to add to that. I think the Abraham Accords is all about that. When you have a peace agreement with two countries, it's more than just bringing peace to the table. It's about bringing opportunity to the table. And when you open different sectors between two countries, whether it was from technology or research or media, that is when you open new opportunities, and that is when you fill the gap of unemployment. Bringing new initiatives to the table means you bring new opportunities to the table. And that's what it's all about. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question? The lady at the back? I think I'm going to have to pass the parcel with the microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
First, a compliment. I watched the moon launch and was very impressed, as were my daughter and my granddaughter, all great moon watchers and space addicts, and impressed by the female component. And I must congratulate the UAE on the female component. And the question is how? How did you reach such a high percentage of women who, as usual, put a woman in charge, and it works well?
Yes, okay.
I think that's a very easy question to answer, actually. I wrote a recent piece on the new Arab Emirati woman. And I believe that stereotypes are all have been made about the Emirati woman, but the magic and the power that comes behind us is the support and encouragement we receive from our government. It has opened all the doors of all sectors in the country, including the society, to include and not exclude their females. Yes, the Hope Probe and also Expo is also led by a female, Reem Al-Hashmi, Her Excellency Reem Al-Hashmi. So yes, the UAE does not exclude but include females in all the sectors of the economy. I'm a female and I'm part of this panel today talking about the Abraham Accords. It is both an honor and a privilege to be an Emirati, to say that the UAE is one of the leading countries when it comes to females and including them in all the sectors of its society and country and the development of its nation. And thank you.
I want to add a word to that. Last night, in the webinar that I was involved in, I heard not only the Minister of Environment, a lady from the who was in a ministry in the UAE, but they also had the ambassador of the UAE in the United Nations, who is another lady who I looked her up, and she was educated, amongst other places, at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, where she took a second degree in Jewish Studies. And she spoke with a really British accent, more than mine, and and she's a Palestinian. And I thought to myself, who's running things there? So enlightened. And where are we?
Does any of them? Okay. Can we move on to the next question, please? Any further takers? Anyone like to venture a question? Okay, so that, well, we're almost, in terms of time, we're almost at the end, and obviously a very efficient session because there's so few questions. So much has obviously been resolved, and no need for any further discussion for now, at any rate. So I will close there. I'd like to thank our three panelists. Thank you for the questions. It's been a very interesting session. And I believe we're moving straight on to our concluding remarks now. So thank you very much once again. Thank you.
All right. This is our concluding session, and no one wants to stand between all of you and the end of your day. So we'll try to keep our remarks brief and on point. But before we do, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Eliezer Al-Hosseini to give the opening concluding remarks. And before I do, and I'm going to give a more complete thanks at the end of my remarks, if we're talking about and thank you for the wonderful question about women in the Emirates, because it gives me an opportunity to say how dynamic Iyaz has been over the last month with us. And I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say that this event probably would not have happened with the degree of success it's had without her immense contribution. And I can say, based on my limited anecdotal experience, that if Iyaz represents the future of Emirati women, it is a bright future indeed. So it is my distinct pleasure to give her the floor. Thank you, Eliezer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brandon Friedman, for those kind words. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, in concluding this important symposium, it gives us great pleasure at Trends Research and Advisory to express our heartfelt thanks and gratitude to the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies, our partner in convening this symposium, and to Tel Aviv University for hosting and organizing it in the best possible way. I would also like to express my sincere appreciation to the strategic partner of Trends Research and Advisory at Ittihad newspaper for its valuable input to the symposium. My thanks are also due to all of the speakers whose contribution and ideas have enriched our gathering today. Throughout the proceedings of the symposium, we have heard many inspiring views and insights that will help us build the foundations of a lasting peace to which we all aspire. We also have heard ideas which would surely enhance the gains of this peace agreement, to lay solid foundations for peace and making it a lasting one. We work together and make use of the ideas we have come up with today. It is certain that building solid foundations for a lasting peace requires enhanced mutual cooperation and strong partnerships that are based on the values of tolerance, dialogue, and coexistence, while preserving the rights of every party. However, hence, we have focused in this symposium on presenting ideas and insights that aim at promoting the role of cultural dialogue as a window to understand each other's culture. Today, we all have agreed on the certainty of media in countering hate speech and the need to focus on building an atmosphere of trust, dialogue, and civilized communication. We have learned here how to harness the media through various platforms that will serve peace in the Middle East and help create new generations that look to the future with a spirit of humanitarian cooperation. Regarding cooperation in the areas of development and technology, we have learned about the various aspects of economic integration and how this could be a reliable base for joint efforts. We have also learned about the common grounds for bilateral technological, scientific, and academic cooperation between our two countries, which have always been striving to excel in working together toward peace and prosperity across the world. We have added significant strategic steps to this cooperation at the academic, security, and geopolitical levels. Ladies and gentlemen, as we now end this symposium and underline the importance of its results, we once more thank you all for the amazing organization and the hospitality we have received from you all. Please do not forget to return your headphones after symposium ends. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliazia, and you'll have to excuse me. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Brandon Friedman. I'm the Director of Research at the Moshe Dayan Center here at Tel Aviv University. And if you'll indulge me for just 5 minutes before I give my concluding remarks of thanks to everyone who's made this event possible. We spoke today about culture, media, technology, in servicing a stronger and more enduring relationship between Israel and the United Arab Emirates in building tolerance, peace, and furthering development. But I'd like to add 4 brief points before we conclude. I'd like to briefly mention history. I'd like to talk about the role of commitment in continuing to make this a success. I'd like to talk about success in itself as an important ingredient here. And finally, I'd like to talk about engagement. First of all, history. For those of you who may not know, we all know here in Israel that David Ben-Gurion played an immense role in declaring Israeli independence in May 1948, despite facing doubt, disagreement, and opposition. In the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan did no less. In July, 6 months before the Day of Unity with the Emirates that led to, on December 9th, the Emirates becoming the 132nd state to join the United Nations, Sheikh Zayed called together the fellow leaders of 6 other Emirates and said, "It's now or never," and I'm paraphrasing, and said, "The moment is here," and it was Sheikh Zayed's leadership that enabled the leaders of the various Emirates to come together and seize the moment, a moment that might have passed. And I think when we talk about leadership and creating the environment, whether it's institutionally or in terms of the opportunities that women have, it takes not only a vision, but it also takes leadership. I would like to say one more thing in that respect. Here in Israel, we had Shimon Peres, who in the mid-1990s spoke of a new or greater Middle East based on the opportunities presented by some of the topics we've talked today. And he also faced a bit of skepticism and doubt here in Israel and beyond. And we have today Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, whose vision doesn't seem to me all that different from what Shimon Peres' vision was in the 1990s, of building for the Emirates and for the region as a whole a prosperity based on people, on a vision of leadership. And so I would like to underline the role of history and recognizing that it can be an important lodestar in guiding us to further success and, more importantly, an enduring success. The second point I'd like to raise is commitment. And here we can also learn from history. There was a great deal of enthusiasm and positive energy in Israel after its peace with Egypt in 1979, with Jordan and the Palestinians in the 1990s. And Professor Shimon Shamir, who was here a little bit earlier, even wrote a wonderful book, The Rise and Fall of the Warm Peace with Jordan. I think it teaches us there's an important cautionary here, that without an enduring commitment that needs to be nurtured and fed every day of every year, then we risk perhaps losing the opportunity to build on what we've created over the last year here. And so I would just remind ourselves that this is something we have to continue to work at. Third, and I think perhaps no less important than the first two, is so far, and we've heard a lot about it today, this relationship has produced success. And I think looking at the Emirates, and I think the 13th annual Arab Youth Survey produced in Dubai called The Hope for the Future said that the UAE in the Arab world is the #1 destination. Arab youth want to go live in the UAE today. And it's no surprise after hearing some of the wonderful presentations today. But I would also say the Abraham Accords themselves have become a source of regional inspiration in the sense that, perhaps in a different sense than the sense we've been talking about for most of today, in the geopolitical sense, that already in the years since the Abraham Accords have signed, we've seen all kinds of regional multilateralism take place that we haven't seen before. If we think in terms of the Eastern Mediterranean gas forum in which the Emirates play an important role as an observer. We see a new kind of multilateralism that we didn't see before. We see the Iranians and the Saudis talking for the first time in quite a while. We see the Baghdad conference at the end of August. We see engagement after a long period in which engagement seemed absent. And I can't help but think that part of the success of the Abraham Accords has contributed to states like Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq wanting to come together to show that they can. And so I think that geopolitically as well, the Abraham Accords serve as an important source of inspiration. And finally, I want to return to a theme that's come up several times today, which is the topic of youth, which I think lies at the core of what we've all been discussing, because ultimately the people who are going to build, protect, and nurture this agreement is the next generation, the people who today are just teenagers. And we have to, in the Emirates, I understand that half the population is between 15 and 35. So we have to find a way to engage them, to get them to talk about and see the kinds of things we've been talking about today. And I've been involved in Track 2 regional initiatives for the last 15 years, and a former student of mine who's here today and will remain unnamed, played an instrumental role in organizing a youth Track 2 engagement in 2016 in Cyprus that brought people together from all over the region to talk before we had the Abraham Accords. And I would say, let's get the Gulf involved in those dialogues. Let's have a more inclusive regional dialogue about the tough issues, the uncomfortable issues, the issues, some of which we heard this morning that sometimes are very difficult to talk about, but necessary to talk about. And I think those are the next steps, engaging the next generation of youth and engaging in a way that we can talk about those hard, difficult, uncomfortable issues beyond some of the important things we've talked about today. So now I'll move on to the most important aspect of the day, which is thanking the people behind the scenes who have made this event possible. First of all, my thanks to Samaya Al-Hajrami, who's not here, obviously Eliazia Al-Hosseini, who has been on the spot, and again, without her here, I'm not sure that things would have come off as successfully as they have. Elizabeth Olejnik, thank you for your contribution. To the staff at the Moshe Dayan Center, who's worked day and night for the last few weeks to make this happen. My sincere thanks to Efrat Shulman, Arad, Moore Vickman, Tali Marco, and to the staff of the Emirati Embassy here in Israel. And finally, to all of the presenters and speakers today. And last but not least, and perhaps most importantly, for all of you here who've spent the day with us, thank you for giving us of your time, for listening, and for supporting these initiatives. We need you to continue to carry this on with us. Thank you all for being here.